What is happening out there, Roto Scouts football fans? Or fan, or nobody. Not sure if anybody's here yet. Just diving in, going live at 4 o'clock. Looks like a couple people. It takes a second for the count to pop up on my streaming site here. A couple people hanging out already. Appreciate you guys. It's going to be an interesting little race. I'm giving myself a now 24-minute head start. The movie The Return of the King starts on the television right over there in a couple of minutes. I'm just kind of interested in the timing of that versus this show as far as which one ends first. But the goal is going to be to get us off the air actually before the start of the ALCS game a little bit later on tonight. That kicks off, I believe, at about 8:30 first pitch. What time is the first pitch in that game? 8:08 first pitch. So we're going to try and get out before that, but that gives us a solid 4 hours. We've only gone about 3.5, 4 hours over the last couple of shows anyway, covering the main slate. Got it a little bit efficient with everything on the single board here, and there's a lot to talk about today. It's a really, really interesting slate. There are big contests up on both sites to work with. Dennis is here. I know Dennis is excited about this one. Dennis is looking toward the FanDuel slate where they've got the $250 10,000 entry Milly Maker, and then over on DraftKings it's a 27,000 entry $100 I believe buy-in Milly Maker over there. So really interesting contests in addition to the usual large field setups. I've got Sims completed against both of those specific Milly Maker tournaments. Just went with the smaller field tourneys just to see kind of what they look like after they come up. So we can give those a look a little bit later on in the show. We'll do our usual tour through the entire slate and talk about game environments. We will talk about individual players up and down the board on what to me looks like a really deep slate. Lot to work with. I actually flagged the London game this week. New England, Jacksonville. What an export. They're going to pop a tariff on that game. But a lot to work with. 3 totals over 50 points on the main slate. And then a couple of really interesting totals between Kansas City and San Francisco at 47.5 points is not an unhealthy game. And then Houston and Green Bay at 47.5 is also another premium seeming game that in a lot of other weeks would lead the slate as far as interest. But so far with this one, Seattle and Atlanta at 51.5 and Detroit, Minnesota at 51 points. Both really compelling in close games, 2.5 point spread and a 3-point spread. I like both of those games a little bit more than I like the 52-point game between Carolina and Washington, just because of the idea that that one does rely on Carolina kind of keeping pace a little bit. So that one's a little bit lower end than the other two, despite having the slightly higher overall total. But all three of those games, very, very interesting. All three of those games worth getting invested in. At the top of the board, kind of an ugly one between Miami and Indianapolis. 43-point total in that one. Indy favored by 3 at home. It's a playable game. Anthony Richardson should be back at the helm for the Colts. He was confirmed as the starter on Friday, regardless of what some projection sites might want you to think. I think they finally got him updated today over on RG. They were being stubborn about the Flacco pick early. But we've had Richardson in since, I think, Thursday afternoon. And looks pretty solid. Looks like a high-end play once again. Going up against a somewhat gettable defense. Pieces on both sides of that one, but it might be a game where there's just a little bit more of a source of individual scoring upside rather than go-to stacking, with a lot of the other games looking a little bit more appealing as just, full-blown stacks. Tyler Huntley at the helm not helping things on the Miami side. If we had capable quarterback play on that side, it might be a more interesting game. Houston and Green Bay, again, very interesting on both sides of that one. You got tons of depth, tons of weapons on both sides. Good running backs, several good receivers, and a good tight end for Houston. Basically duplicating that scenario with twice the good receivers on the Green Bay side. So tons and tons of depth to work with. I do think that's a stackable game on both sides with good bring back plays on both sides. It's probably the 4th or 5th most appealing game of the slate, just given the incredible depth that this one offers. But definitely going to be involved, and in no way would that surprise me if that game goes out and wins the slate. You've got 2 high-end quarterbacks on both sides and excellent skill weapons up and down. Cincinnati and Cleveland, kind of a low-end one. David Njoku stands out as maybe a value option at a very low price from the Cleveland side. Everything about the Cincinnati offense is capable and relatively high end, and they could put up a decent scoring first half. You could see one of their big receivers have a very successful high upside. You're going to need it kind of a week. even in a bad game environment. It's just, does that really pull along a full stack upside? They're favored by 6 points in a 42-point game. Not exactly the best upside game environment, and some pricey players to boot. Jamar Chase, not exactly inexpensive. But pairing him in a +1 with Joe Burrow always has some value, and you could definitely get there with that as your core stack, while still going to, say, an Amon-Ra Justin Jefferson pairing from the next game as a way to get to that in a premium sense without actually stacking the quarterback. So there are ways to approach it, and that's the same with the Green Bay and Houston game. You can definitely grab a Stroud +1 stack with a bring back from the other side and still pair those two big receivers using the flex spot. So a lot of different ways to approach things here. But the Cincinnati-Cleveland game, one of the uglier spots on the board. Detroit and Mini with just a 2.5-point spread, 51-point total in Minnesota looks like a great spot. There are weapons on both sides. Excellent passing offenses with a very solid number 1 on both sides, a very solid number 2 or 1A option, depending on what you think of Williamson and Addison in that role. But both guys have been productive receivers. Both guys have upside. TJ Hawkinson, a name to watch. He was working his way back through practice. We'll see if he actually ends up suiting up. I haven't caught a recent status update on him, but we'll keep an eye on that one. Obviously, Sam Laporta, a high-end tight end who has kind of underperformed expectations early this season, but definitely still a go-to option. And then super capable running backs in that game, specifically on the Detroit side with that dual-headed backfield that scores basically every week. Hawkinson out. Thanks, Power. That was one I hadn't gone back to double check since finishing the ridiculously long article. Full Optimizer Group's article is up. The game notes are done. I switched up the order with the show and the game notes this week just because I want to get some sleep tonight. I'm heading to my parents' tomorrow for a barbecue for my mom's birthday. Want to be conscious for that. So I figured it was better to approach it that week. But sounds like Hawkinson not going to play. That just makes the tight end position just kind of uninteresting. Yeah, downgraded to out as of this afternoon. Appreciate the note there, bud. But yeah, that makes the tight end position less interesting on the Minnesota side, but definitely feeds upside for the receiving corps. Seattle and Atlanta with a 51.5-point total. Two very aggressive, high-paced, pass-focused offenses with some upside for skill players across the board. Some involved running backs on both sides. Love this game for upside. Love this game for a definite shootout potential. I don't think Geno Smith, I was mentioning it to Dennis earlier in the chat, I don't think that Geno Smith, that Geno Smith is going to go through the entire season throwing around 300 yards a game, but only one touchdown pass. I do think there's significant upside for that team to bust loose one of these weeks. They've got excellent weapons up and down the receiving group. They've got a capable enough tight end, and again, a very capable running back on the Seattle side, and basically the same thing up and down on the Atlanta side. So like the scoring potential in that one, like both quarterbacks, definitely both stacks, bring back plays on both sides. It's getting interesting looking at all the options and the way that they click together between Detroit, Minnesota, Seattle, and Atlanta, and that's before we even get to the Carolina-Washington game or the KC-San Francisco game. Philly and New York, there's pieces in that one too. Philly is difficult to suppress as far as just raw scoring potential. They have Hurts, Saquon, A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith just push up the just raw scoring average every single week. What they don't have is a great points per dollar rating because all those guys are expensive. But Saquon Barkley against what is one of the worst rush defenses in football, the only thing the Giants defense has going for it is a pass rush. They're bad in the secondary. They're bad at stopping the run. They're bad at stopping scoring. They're bad at stopping pass yardage. They just put a lot of pressure on the QB and get to him quite a bit. They're leading the league in sack rate this season, but that's all they're doing. Saquon's going to be going up against his former team, if you believe in the whole revenge thing. But more to the point, he's going up against a team that's allowing more than 5 yards per rush attempt to opposing running backs. He looks like a dynamite option this week at a high price. There are some key running backs who are drawing a lot of chalk. That was another thing that Dennis and I talked about briefly in the Discord before the show. Chuba Hubbard in the Carolina-Washington games picking up a ton of upside, a ton of ownership. Kenny Walker reasonably is picking up a lot. Who are the other ones we mentioned? Top of my head, it's failing. And Pollard. Tony Pollard is another one that just kind of is a key upside potential in that next game against Buffalo, and they've been a sieve on defense against running backs as well. He's going to have the focus in that rushing attack this week. So I like the upside for Pollard, but all three of those guys will be chalky. And I think we're going to see in Sims, it will probably pay up a little bit at the running back position, which is the way that Dennis and I got onto that question in Discord. I do think it makes some sense to consider some of the pricey options, the Saquons of the world. Kyron Williams is another guy who's getting a lot of attention for ownership, but I think another guy on volume and matchup well worth paying up for in that Rams-Vegas game coming up. On the Giants side, they're getting Malik Neighbors back in the passing game this week. That should help somewhat, but he's a target monster. He was drawing, I believe it was 12 or 13 targets a game when he went out. We'll see it in just a minute when I pull the stats up. But an absolute monster for targeting. He would have had a better start to the season probably with 26 of the 32 other quarterbacks in the league, or the 31 other quarterbacks in the league. Daniel Jones is not good. Neighbors made him look decent. He had one good game with Neighbors out. The Seattle game, he threw 2 touchdown passes. They were competent, and they won the game. I'll give them that much. But he was very bad in the last game and is pretty low end overall. So it's more a matter of how far down does Daniel Jones drag Neighbors than how far up does Neighbors drag Jones. I think Neighbors on his own is a very good play. I don't think that the Giants stack up all that well, even against a pretty bad Philadelphia defense. Tennessee and Buffalo. Tennessee's defense has been pretty good as far as limiting yardage. They're among the league leaders against the pass and the run as far as limiting yardage, but they haven't done anything in terms of sack rate, anything in terms of interception rate. So Buffalo should have a chance to at least deliver on their implied team total. It's just they're 8-point favorites in a game with just a 40.5-point total. They've been kind of underwhelming. They've just been super efficient. They've done their scoring, and they've marched up and down the field and just put the ball in the end zone on just a few plays every single time they've had it this season. So there is upside there. It's just I question how much they're really going to need to press the gas pedal down against a really bad Tennessee team that's still got Will Levis at the helm and really has been incapable in the passing game. Unless Pollard really explodes for a true upside game, it's going to be limited. I think Buffalo goes out there, scores 2 touchdowns, kicks a field goal, and says thank you very much, and just coasts the rest of the way. So questionable spot there with Buffalo favored by 8, but obviously excellent weapons. Amari Cooper joining that team. You're going to have to think that they're going to take him out of the toy chest at least a couple times and see what they've got in that connection there. So I like the upside for an Allen to Cooper connection, but it's far down the board in terms of all the appealing spots on this slate. And then Buffalo, down lineup, Khalil Shakir, guys like that will pick up value as now under-owned pieces in different roles. I think Shakir will have an opportunity to shine. Same with Keon Coleman, with more of the attention going Cooper's way. Should also help Kincaid a little bit. Carolina and Washington, I've referred to it a few times. 2 of the worst defenses in football. Washington, the second highest scoring offense in football so far this year. A lot of their work coming on the ground, but Jaden Daniels has been excellent in the passing game as well. He's completing a ton of his passes. They're one of the league leading teams in terms of yards per pass attempt. It's just most of their touchdowns have come in the rushing attack. Daniels has accounted for several of them himself on the ground. He's thrown a few touchdowns. He's been excellent. He's leading a hyper-focused passing attack that really, really revolves around Terry McLaurin, with a few looks toward Zach Ertz at the tight end, a few looks toward Noah Brown at the wide receiver spot. But there's a significant focus on McLaurin as far as who's on the receiving end of those passing opportunities. And then Brian Robinson Jr. in the rushing game sees a significant opportunity and a lot of touchdowns. So tons of upside for the Washington side. Where I question it is around Carolina. We've got Andy Dalton at the helm. Even with him driving the boat, they really have not been good. They had the one good game. He threw 3 touchdown passes. He threw for more than 300 yards. They do have similar upside to that against a scuffling Washington defense, but they're not a good football team, even with Dalton. Deontay Johnson's all right. The other options are okay. We'll look at them. Chuba Hubbard might be the go-to option, and he's popular for a reason against a leaky Washington defense. 52-point total. We're going to need Carolina to come through, like I was saying before, to drive that upside for Washington. Vegas and the Rams, kind of a low-end game here outside of maybe a few skill player grabs. Vegas now with no Devontae Adams. They've also are most likely going to be without Jacoby Myers, another player I haven't checked his Saturday status yet, but he was trending toward not playing. I think they downgraded him to doubtful last I saw, so I wouldn't expect him to be out there. It's Aiden O'Connell at the quarterback position, so not a lot going on for them. The Rams should be getting Cooper Kupp back. That was the expectation. Kupp should be fine, but we'll question what they're actually going to need to do to beat this Vegas Vegas team shouldn't be that much. And Kyron Williams should be the beneficiary of a ton of carries, ton of opportunities to put his hands on the football against a pretty bad defense. So I think he makes a lot of sense as an expensive piece of pretty good chalk. KC and San Fran. 2 out of the last 5 Super Bowls were played between these two teams. KC got there a third time, obviously. 47.5 point total, just a 1-point game. There's a ton of upside in this game. It's just neither of these teams actually ranks out all that great. San Francisco just kind of spreads the ball around to all their really high-end options, any one of which could go off any given week. No Jawan Jennings down the depth chart in the San Francisco passing game could lead to downboard opportunities or could just lead to more of a concentration on Debo, Brandon Ayuk, and George Kittle, all of whom demand tons of volume and attention. Kittle scored, I want to say, 5 receiving touchdowns on the season. Debo's obviously super high end with his skills, both at the in the ground game and through the air. And then Ayuk is a premium receiver. Jordan Mason's dealing with a shoulder injury, but seemed like he was trending toward playing. He's got explosive upside in the running game, even though he's coming off 2, for him, clunkers. Last week wasn't good. The week before was okay. He gained a significant yardage, I believe, in the 80s range, but didn't score. But Mason's got clear upside in that one. On the KC side, we're a little bit thinner in terms of the receiving core. They do have Travis Kelce, obviously. They've been banged up and not quite as productive as they've been in years past, but they've also been in a situation where they haven't exactly had to do a ton to win football games. So I do think with a push from San Francisco, there's obvious upside for Patty Mahomes. Kelce's been coming on over the last 2 games, so there's a little bit of appeal there. That one rounds out the DK slate. Then we get this weird, ugly, but potentially maybe interesting and potentially maybe sneaky and not actually ugly Jets-Pittsburgh game on the FanDuel slate. Breece Hall's drawing a lot of attention in ownership projections that I saw from the Jets, and basically nothing else is, which I really question the accuracy of those projections. For one, Devontae dropping onto the board is going to get at least some people curious about, I want to see what this looks like, I'm going to go to that. For 2, Rodgers not all that expensive. He's got significant upside, even against a capable enough Pittsburgh D. He's got a lot of potential throwing the ball now to basically the old Packers. It's Devontae. He's got Allen Lazard, who is connected with for 5 touchdowns already on the season. So he's been he's got significant weapons with those 2 and with Garrett Wilson still there. So there's major upside. There's Breece Hall. There's a capable enough tight end who hasn't drawn a ton of volume in Tyler Conklin. They've got weapons galore on this Jets team. We're just looking at a 38-point total on Sunday night with a 1.5-point spread. Pittsburgh bringing Russ Wilson in for the first time. It's funny. It was going around the coaching staff was kind of being coy with the media, like, oh, well, we're not going to actually tell you who's going to play quarterback. We'll see when Sunday rolls around. And then they went to George Pickens and they were like, hey, how's your week of practice been going? And he's like, I've been getting a lot of extra reps with Russ since this is going to be his first start this weekend. And just kind of spilled the beans. Not that it was a big secret anyway. It was kind of obvious that that's what they were doing, but all but confirmed from Pickens. I do think there's a little bit of potential maybe in at least the Pittsburgh skill players. Najee's drawing his usual share of a little bit of upside as is difficult to suppress at fairly low prices. He is one of the value running backs in consideration on an ugly value running back slate. Pickens and Freiermuth in the passing game, potentially could see a little bit of an uptick with enhanced quality of target, if not opportunity. So maybe a little bit to kick around in the Jets-Pittsburgh game as a late-night hammer. There's definitely skill player upside on the Jets side at the very least. It's just, what does Rodgers end up doing with it? He is obviously the decision maker in New York, so he might come out and say, hey, I know we did just say last week that we're going to be rush-focused from now on, but I got some new toys here and I want to play with them. So I kind of lean that way as far as what the Jets are going to do. I kind of like that game to go a little bit over. I don't know how far over, though. I don't know how much it's really a go-to opportunity as far as stacking, how much you want like a Rodgers +2. Gets a little thin. So you could end the show there if you wanted to. 20 minutes in. Solid slate summary. I think it did an okay job there. A lot off the top of the noggin. I get a little bit more depth soaked into the brain, though, to be able to just talk off the cuff if I've written the article beforehand. Some of those numbers are still clicking around in there. So hopefully that was helpful. Those of you who are here for the long haul, hit the like button as we get started. Just a handful of folks here, as usual. for this football show. People know that it goes long and they can dive in overnight. It's hitting a little bit late today. Oh, Greg, I totally agree with that. Yeah, I was saying that going into last season before the injury. Jets are crazy hitching their wagon to Rodgers. Yeah, my take, I'm sure you heard me say it before, but my take was last year, in a year where Verlander Scherzer didn't work out for the Mets, how is a Aaron Rodgers for the Jets going to work out? If you know those organizations, same deal. Somebody on Twitter was recently comparing the Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett Nets to the Aaron Rodgers-led Jets, which is another pretty apt comparison. But it's the Jets. The Jets are going to jet. Let's get into this thing here. First game up, this ugly Carolina-Washington game. I say ugly because Carolina I just think is pretty bad. It's obviously a really appealing game as far as our DFS scoring needs go, as long as Carolina can hang, like I was saying in the breakdown. Washington's put up 29.7 points per game this season. That ranks second. They've gained 5.1 yards per rush attempt to rank fifth. 8.3 yards per pass attempt ranks them fourth overall. Despite the focus primarily being on the ground as far as their touchdown scoring, 2.2 rushing touchdowns a game leads football. They do have significant weapons in the passing game, and they're going up against a team that is not overly difficult to beat through the air. 4.5 yards allowed on the ground by Carolina per attempt ranks 15th. They've given up 8 yards per pass attempt to rank 27th overall. So there, and yes, I did update that column. So there's definitely a clear path to Washington succeeding. There's a clear path to Washington winning this game and covering that 8-point spread. It's just how much are they going to need to do to be over the top to beat this Carolina team? Are they going to go out there and score 3 touchdowns and then that's it? Or are they going to really feed our upside for DFS scoring? And we really would need them to feed our upside for DFS scoring. They rank strong across sites. They're stack 8 by points and stack 7 by value on DraftKings, stack 6 across the board on FanDuel. And you can see Jaden himself, QB1 by raw scoring on both sites. QB6 by value on DraftKings, 3 by value on FanDuel. Highly, highly playable option. McLaurin, a top 10 receiver across both sites with top 5 value rankings on both. Brian Robinson Jr., he's banged up. He's been dealing with a knee issue. Did practice. He was limited in practice Thursday and Friday. Make sure we got status on him. I'm expecting him to play. I've had him in projections all along. Still technically questionable. Limited in practice on Friday. No coach speak that I'm seeing here. But my expectation is that he goes, and he looks pretty tremendous. So he ranks out really well. If it's not him, Eckler is a downgrade for sure at the position, but would see an opportunity-based upside. And Jeremy McNichols would see a pretty decent spike from these unplayable level rankings and just a 1-point projection. He'd probably land in the 5-6 range. I do think that the opportunities in that scenario, like what we saw last week, Eckler picked up 41 snaps, carried the ball 9 times, caught 4 of 5 targets in the passing game. McNichols played 22 snaps, carried the ball just twice for 9 yards, and was untargeted. Prior to that, he had carried the ball 8 times in Week 4, gained 68 yards, and scored twice, and carried the ball 7 times in Week 5, gained 44 yards, and scored once. So there was some expectation that maybe the ball would get in his hands a little bit more, and it really didn't happen. So I think we would be dealing with that same kind of a scenario. I'm noticing Eckler's actually a little bit highly projected there, though, right now for this setup. Better draw that down somewhat. With Robinson out there, Eckler's opportunity kind of is more limited. He'll be out there playing some snaps, but he'll see only 3 to 5 touches or 3 to 5 carries with another 2 to 3 targets. Overall on the season, Robinson's carried the ball 14.5 times a game, gaining a pretty terrific 4.5 yards per rush attempt. He's scored 5 times on the ground. Jaden's right next to him with 4 rushing touchdowns already on the season. And they had another one with Eckler putting one in the end zone. John Bates has run the ball in 3 times. Oh no, that's McNichol. I was like, wait a minute. I skipped to the wrong line. That makes a lot more sense, and I just said that before. McNichols ran the ball in 3 times. 2 out of the last 3 games, but did not see a big opportunity in the last game. But that is a significant number of rushing touchdowns. Again, their rushing touchdown upside leads football so far this year. The scoring through the passing game has gone 4 times to Terry McLaurin. Diami Brown's got a receiving touchdown on the board as well. Jaden Daniels has thrown 6 touchdowns on the season to 2 interceptions, but he's completing 75% of his pass attempts. So the volume is not incredibly significant, but the efficiency and the upside is terrific. 8.5 yards per pass attempt is very strong, 7.2 intended air yards per attempt, and completing 5 air yards per attempt. So he's a pretty good downfield passer who's been highly, highly accurate this season. It's just he tends to find McLaurin and only McLaurin. 14.3 yard ADOT for McLaurin. He's gained 51.08% of the team's air yard share on 7.2 targets a game. The next most frequently targeted option is Zach Ertz at the tight end spot, 4.8 targets a game. He's picking up an 8.4 yard ADOT, gaining solid 7.9 yards per target, but he hasn't scored yet this season. He is the second leader in terms of the air yards, though. 20.2% of the air yards go in his direction. On a 10.8 yard ADOT, Noah Brown picks up 16% of the air yards. He also hasn't scored yet. Everybody else is a little bit more limited down the board, though. Olamide Zacchaeus has picked up 3.5 targets a game. He's gained 7.2 yards per target on just a 4-yard ADOT. Kind of an underneath, make something happen kind of a player, and he really hasn't made all that much happen. Just 7% of the air yards. He hasn't scored yet this season. Diami Brown, just 5.6 yard ADOT for his 1.7 targets a game. So another guy catch the ball underneath or in the flat, make something happen with it. You're a little bit thinner there. Luke McCaffrey, same kind of a thing. So all of these guys, just short passing routes, while McLaurin and Noah Brown are getting a little bit deeper of an opportunity, and to some degree Zach Ertz. There's scoring upside for Ertz. He failed to convert any of his red zone targets in week 5, but he was targeted in the red zone 4 times. Just 1 target last week in the red zone, but those were his first 5 red zone targets through the season. So it's nice to see that they at least remembered that he's there once they get in close. I do think that he's got, pretty significant upside at 3,900, 5,100. He's not an uninvolved piece in this offense, and the touchdowns are coming. I mean, he is still a capable tight end, even at this point in his career. Ranks his tight end 11 by points, 14 by value, 13 and 12 on FanDuel. There are better options, but in stacks especially, Ertz is easy to play. McCaffrey caught just 1 pass last week for 5 yards, 3 for 19 the week before, 1 for 17 before that. Zacchaeus caught 4 balls, but it just went for 27 yards on his 6 targets in week 6. Brown had just 1 catch for 11 last week, but he had a big week 5 in terms of output. He caught just 2 of 2 targets, but he gained 57 yards and scored a touchdown on a big play. So he does have explosive upside if he catches the ball in the right lane, but that's really all you're dealing with. The focus for DC is very much around Daniels. You can play him as a standalone quarterback, naked, but it's not ideal. I think getting him +1 with McLaurin, +2 with McLaurin, Brown, or Ertz, or even with Robinson in there, assuming he plays. Robinson's drawn 2.2 targets a game. He's got the significant scoring upside on the ground. And as we've talked about before, there is indirect correlation opportunity with a running back, with the right running back anyway, on a team that can put the ball down the field a little bit, but might come up short of the end zone. He picks up a little bit of indirect correlation via touchdown scoring upside there, and he is involved in the passing game for direct correlation. So I like the +2s. I probably prefer it as a thinner +1 stack though, and then that limits the need for Carolina to truly keep the pace all the way through the game. If they give us a good first half, we're okay. But Hubbard is a decent bring back option on this side. So is Deontay Johnson. Xavier Legette gets a little bit thinner, but he does rank as a top 30 option on DraftKings by points per dollar, just under it on FanDuel. We're inside the top 40 at least as an affordable option. Andy Dalton has thrown the ball 36 times in his per game in his starts. He's got 7 touchdowns against just 4 interceptions, but a chunk of that came in one big performance. In his first start, he threw 3 touchdown passes, 319 yards, completing 26 of 37. The volume's been there in the next couple of starts, but he's been 220-ish yards in two of them, 220 and 221 in two of those games. Each of those games, he did throw 2 touchdown passes. That was week 4 and week 6. But he also threw 2 interceptions in week 6. He threw 1 in week 4. In week 5, threw no touchdowns and an interception on 18 and 28 passing for 136 yards. So we can get kind of limited. Dalton's been okay. He's been better than what they were getting out of Young, but it's not great. I don't think it's worth getting too excited about the Carolina side of this game. Overall for the season, even with him driving for a few weeks, we're at just 17.2 points per game. That's not going to get it done as far as keeping Washington on the move here. We need Carolina to do better than that. They've gained 4.7 yards per rush attempt because Chuba Hubbard has actually been pretty good this year, but just 5.8 yards per pass attempt overall. Dalton is at 6.2 yards per pass attempt. So we have, again, seen an uptick with him, but that's a 0.4 uptick. That's not a massive leap forward from their season-long average. The good news for them, they're going up against an extremely leaky defense, so that should at least help our cause as far as keeping this team in the game. 5.0 yards allowed per rush attempt ranks 29th. 8.1 yards allowed per pass attempt is in a multi-way tie from, I think, 28th through 31st, I want to say. They've got 17 sacks on the season, but just 1 interception so far, the Washington defense. They really haven't been good. They can put pressure on the quarterback, but their sack rate, 8.9, actually the sack rate's okay. 8.95% ranks 5th. But the 0.58% interception rate, the 1 interception, puts them 29th. So while they can put the quarterback on the move, and maybe that impacts Dalton a little bit, it hasn't really helped the secondary. It definitely hasn't helped them shut down the pass as far as yardage allowed. They've been a bit bend don't break against the run. They've allowed just 0.8 rushing touchdowns. That lands middle of the league. It's in a tie for 13th, despite all the yardage that they've allowed. But that puts them at a 2 passing touchdowns average against. So there's upside. There's conceivable upside for Chuba Hubbard to do his work up and down the field, maybe punch one in. Andy Dalton benefits from Hubbard's ability to run. He also benefits from the ability to gain yardage against this defense. If they can keep him upright against the pass rush, that's really the only X factor here. Deontay's good enough to get open against this secondary. He's got a little bit of potential. He's been targeted 9.2 times per game, 10 times last week. Leads the team with 36.5% of the air yards. He's been in the end zone 3 times. Catching about half his passes, 4.8 receptions a game, a little bit more than half. 6.2 yards per target. That's actually under the 7.0 yards per target that Xavier Legette has provided on 4.2 opportunities per game. He's catching 2.7 of them per game, but that is not a lot of volume. If you're just looking at 3 opportunities to do anything with the ball, that's really limiting for DFS ceiling scoring. He does have an 11.8 yard ADOT that's compelling, nearly 20% of the air yards. He's been in the end zone twice. He's not bad, but it's a bad offense overall. Jonathan Mingo hasn't really been that interesting. He hasn't been in the end zone yet this year. 12.6% of the air yards on under 4 targets a game. There was some thought that with Adam Thielen dropping out, he would potentially pick up opportunity. He has been... the hell is he? There he is. He picked up 29 snaps last week, ran 14 routes. That was down from 39 snaps the week before and 30 routes. He was targeted 5 times that week, caught 2 balls for 37 yards, targeted 5 times for 3 catches and 24 yards on 55 snaps, 41 routes in week 4. So the opportunity came down pretty significantly in week 6. It could bounce back up a little bit, but either way, even with a return to that opportunity, we're really talking about a limited receiver with limited output and no touchdowns. Jatavian Sanders has been involved at the tight end position with 3 targets a game, putting up just 5 yards per target. He hasn't scored yet this season. Tommy Tremble's been in and out of the lineup with injury. They also got Ian Thomas back in this lineup. It's just kind of a mixed bag at the tight end position. Don't really want any of them. Tremble's coming back from a concussion. He practiced in full during the week. He peaked at 3 catches and 29 yards back in week 3. He had 1 catch for 7 yards in week 5. Didn't play week 6. Thomas played last week. He played 21 snaps, ran 6 routes, was targeted 3 times, failed to catch any of them. Jatavian Sanders played 45 snaps last week. He ran 28 routes, was targeted 7 times, caught 5 balls for 49 yards. But if Tremble comes back, he might cede some of that opportunity back the other way. The week before, actually, that was the week that Tremble got hurt. In week 4, Tremble played 60 snaps to Sanders' 20. So there's definitely a job issue there. I wouldn't be overly compelled to go to any of the tight ends in this offense. Johnson, Leggett, and Mingo are okay receiving options. Jalen Coker's also there. He's played a little bit. Oh, weird. The route stats and the snap stats didn't populate on this board. He caught 4 of 4 targets in week 5 for 68 yards and 3 of 3 targets for 30 yards in week 6. So there's a little bit of involvement, a little bit of upside for Coker. Could easily replace the opportunity that Mingo gets. Those are basically interchangeable parts if you want to activate one and deactivate one in a group from time to time. I do think that could make some sense just to make sure that you get a little bit of shimmy between those two players, but neither one is overly appealing. Neither is David Moore down the lineup. It's really about Chuba Hubbard on this offense. I really got to think. He's going to be chalky again, but he rates out as RB6 by points and RB2 by value on DraftKings, 5 and 3 on the FanDuel slate in what is, again, a very good spot. He's carried the ball just over 14 times a game, gaining 80-plus yards per game on 5.6 yards per rush attempt. I was not sold on Chuba Hubbard's talent coming into the year. I'm pretty sold now. That's a significant yards per attempt. He's got a solid potential touches per game with four targets a game. This puts him in the 18-plus range. As usual, we're looking for 18 to 20 potential touches at the absolute least. 20 plus is a dream. Hubbard's got 1 touchdown in the passing game, 2 on the ground. He's been effective except for getting in the end zone, but 3 touchdowns is not nothing. He can give you scoring upside, but I definitely like his ability to at least run up and down the field and accrue yardage in this one. Good opportunity to chase a bonus in this one as the focal point of the Carolina offense against a bad rush defense. So I like his upside there. I like his potential. Down the depth chart for both teams, no real love for anything. And, weird, why the defenses both sort to the bottom. Defensively, I don't think you're going to either of these teams. Washington's defense grades out poorly, and so does Carolina. So I don't think even for value at subs 5.5 point projections, there's really any reason to consider those guys. Top bonus guy in that game, I'm going to give it to Chuba Hubbard. I just think on volume, on potential, makes some sense. Let me resort this real quick so we get the defenses just back where they belong. How you guys doing out there? I feel like I just kind of dove in and been sprinting through talking. Not that we've covered a ton of ground yet, but been talking at a rapid pace without really saying hi to everybody. Dennis is in there. Charbonnet value would definitely change this slate. Kenneth Walker got downgraded. That would be interesting. Yeah, Charbonnet, as Dennis points out, Charbonnet value would be solid. Gofius and Dennis agreeing on the Commanders' tackling abilities lacking. Yeah, I would say so. Robinson IR. What do you? Not sure which Robinson you're referring to there. Gofius. With common last names, let's make sure to drop first names in. I assume you were talking about Brian Robinson. He's not on IR. He was practicing during the week and seems likely to play. He was limited in practice, but he played Wednesday through Friday. So I think he's back on the field this week. It's one to keep an eye on for sure, though. I mean, he's solidly questionable right now. If he doesn't go, like I said, I do think it favors Eckler. But this is actually probably the Robinson doesn't play Eckler projection. I got to lower that for actual if they're both out there. So I would expect to see Eckler around here, which puts him as RB17 across DraftKings, 21-20 on FanDuel. Not overly appealing. Game 2 up. Cincinnati, Cleveland. This is an ugly game. I really don't like this one. There is, as I was saying in the quick rundown, There's scoring potential on the Cincinnati side for sure. For one thing, 26.2 points per game so far this year. They rank 9th in scoring overall. 4.6 yards per rush attempt, a solid 7.9 yards per pass attempt, as you would expect from this team. They're running a 62% pass-leaning offense that is a fairly aggressive 7th ranked overall. Joe Burrow's an excellent quarterback. He's got 2 very high-end weapons in Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, both fully healthy. You can see Jamar Chase ranks as WR2 on both sides by raw scoring. Joe Burrow's QB6 on both sides. Both guys are playable values, top 10 values on both sides. Those 2 players specifically, I definitely think have any given slate appeal for 2-3 touchdowns between them shared in a correlated sense. As a Burrow +1, you can go Burrow Chase. You can go Burrow Higgins. No problem with it. +2, I do think gets a little bit thin. I have no expectations for Cleveland to do anything in this game, even with Cincinnati not exactly being a great defense. For one thing, Cincinnati has been decent against the pass. 10th ranked 6.6 yards per pass attempt. 14th ranked 4.4 yards allowed per rush attempt on this season. They've yielded 25.3 points per game, which is 25th. So, I mean, if Cleveland's going to score, little Battle of Ohio here, you would think maybe this would be the game to do it in. But now we're talking about a Cleveland team that's down their lead receiver with no Amari Cooper after the trade. So you're dealing with Jerry Jeudy, who has not developed a connection with Deshaun Watson. David Njoku is your number 2. You've got Nick Chubb potentially coming back to do God knows what on the ground. I just don't love the upside for anything Cleveland today, this weekend. Are you guys in on the Chubb thing? Does anybody think he's going to get... I've got him as like the nominal lead back right now, but I just kind of halved it between him and Foreman and Pierre Strong getting like a little bit. It is a good matchup for running, or an okay one anyway. Jerome Ford out, so we know that he's going to be gone. The question mark with Chubb is just, what does it look like? Played 2 games last year, carried the ball 28 times, gained 170 yards, had 1 big game, and was on his way to a second one, but obviously came up with a massive injury. Multiple ligament tears, ACL and MCL, I want to say. I'm not sure if the PCL was in there as well, but it might have been. The last time we had him at full strength, 2022, he carried the ball 302 times for 1,525 yards and scored 12 rushing touchdowns, added 239 more yards and a receiving touchdown. He's an absolute monster. He's a volume beast. He's a very good player when healthy, but we are now talking about a 28-year-old running back coming off of a dual, if not triple, ligament injury in his knee, having missed more than a year. History is against Nick Chubb in this situation, pretty firmly. He lands as RB 27, 28, 29, 31 across sites. I really want no part of him. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I'll take the L. I wouldn't completely rule out the superhero game from Nick Chubb where he comes out, just looks like the old Nick Chubb somehow, but I'm probably not going to own it. Watson I've talked about all season, even for 4,900, I just don't like the quarterback upside. QB 19-19. 19 by points, 19 by points per dollar on DraftKings, despite costing $4,900 as a quarterback. That's how bad Deshaun Watson is. For the season, he's thrown the ball 33 times a game, completing just 61% of his passes, 5 touchdowns and 3 interceptions, just 5.1 yards per pass attempt, 7.1 intended air yards and just 3 air yards per attempt. Everything is short. Everything is inaccurate. It's been ugly. He has not been over 200 yards this season. He had a 2-touchdown game that came in week 3 against my Giants. It was the closest he got to 200 yards, of course. 21 of 37 against the Giants, just 56.8% completion rate, but gained 196 yards through 2 TDs and no interception that game. He also carried the ball 4 times for 26 yards in that one. He's run the ball a little bit each game, but has only gained 1 rushing touchdown on the year. 4.8 attempts per game, gaining 5.1 yards per rush attempt. Maybe their money would be better spent turning him into a running back. I really don't like the upside for this quarterback. He drags down Jerry Jeudy with him. Judy does land as an okay value receiver because he only costs $4,800 and he's presumably going to step into the lead role here. 26 by points, but 6th by points per dollar. 28-13. Honestly, if he was just 26-26, 28-28, that would be playable in terms of we need at least 3 wide receivers. But the upside is really limited. 6 targets a game, that'll go up. He does have a 12.9 yard ADOT. That is a good downfield option. 33.5% of the air yards will probably go up into the 50% range. He's only scored once this season. He's only catching half of his targets because the other half are pretty poorly thrown. I don't think it's Jerry Jeudy's fault. I think it's Deshaun Watson's fault, but that doesn't mean anything in the long run as far as Jeudy's playability. He's caught just 1 pass on 3 targets in each of the last 2 games, despite playing 45 and 48 snaps, 35 and 26 routes run. He peaked at 6 catches for 72 yards against Las Vegas in week 4. He got in the end zone in week 1 on 3 catches for 25 yards over 8 targets. He's been a frequent enough target. The volume is going to be there for sure. The downfield nature is there for sure. But what does it really yield with a guy who can't deliver the ball well? Njoku's missed a lot of time. Played week 1, gained 44 yards on 4 of 5 receiving, missed the next 3 games. Came back for just 25 snaps, caught 1 ball for 14 yards on 3 targets week 5. Had a decent week 6, caught 5 of 7 passes, but with the way that Watson's not really throwing the ball down the field, it amounted to 31 yards. No real significant contribution there from Njoku yet, just a 3.9 yard average depth of target. Obviously, we haven't been in the end zone in just the 3 games. I do think he's got significant upside just on touchdown scoring potential, and he's very, very cheap for what we know this player is capable of. He rates out better on the PPR site than he does on FanDuel. 4,100 over there. It rates him as tight end 7 by points, but tight end 1 by points per dollar. He's tight end 6.2 on FanDuel because he is, again, very cheap for 5,300. I question the viability of the Browns' defense down here, but they are showing pretty decent points per dollar value. It's just a scratch-off $2,500, $3,500 defense that you just plug in and hope for 4 to 6 points. Just don't give me a 0 or negative, and I'm okay. But it's a pretty low-end defense against what is a pretty high-end offense. If there's any competition in this game, I could see Cincinnati putting the gas pedal down a little bit and lighting that defense up. So I don't love that spot, despite the way that it rates out okay. Elijah Moore, just a limited receiver in this passing attack. He catches the ball on a lot of short opportunities, seeing 3.8 targets a game, catching 2.7 of them. That's decent return for the limited targeting, but he catches it on just a 4.7 yard ADOT. They're looking for him to do things with the ball in his hands. On the 4.7 yard average depth of target, he's returned just 4.1 yards per target. That doesn't really add up well. Less than 10% of the air yards, no touchdowns on the season. Pretty bad. Donta Foreman has carried the ball 6.5 times a game, gaining just 3.2 yards per rush attempt. Pierre Strong's been the better running back. He's carried the ball just 3 times a game, but at least gained 4.2 yards per opportunity. Neither one of them has scored in the rushing game. Neither one of them has been very involved in the passing game. You have a down depth chart touchdown that went to Jordan Akins, the backup tight end, but there's no real appeal there, despite the 2.8 targets a game. Most of that came while Njoku was out. It's a really, really, really thin offense. Jamari Thrash, likely to be active for this one. He's a player who has been mentioned here and there just in the wake of the trade clearing up a opportunity. He was a 5th round pick, hasn't played in any of the first 6 games. I don't really see the need to get excited about him. I've got him currently below 1 point. I'll keep an eye on it. If there's any coach speak, maybe he ticks up over a point, but it looks like a pretty limited spot to me. Cedric Tillman hasn't really done much, though, as the guy who is nominally a little bit more involved. Drawing a sub-4 projection on both sides, rates as a bottom half receiver overall. He's been targeted less than 1 time per game so far. He caught exactly 1 pass for less than 5 yards in each of the first 3 games and has been targetless since then, despite running 5 routes in week 4, 10 routes in week 5, and 12 routes in week 6. So it is a very, very concentrated Cleveland offense, and it's a pretty bad one too. Cincinnati, a lot more to work with. I mentioned Jamar Chase and his tremendous abilities. He's only scored 5 touchdowns already this season, 28% of the air yards on an 8.7 yard average depth of target, returning 13.5 yards per target for his 7 targets a game. He's tremendous, and he's just kind of kind of getting started after a light beginning, let's say, to the season. Didn't score until week 3. 2 touchdowns in that game, a touchdown in week 4, 2 touchdowns in week 5 on 10 catches for 193 yards. Cooled off a little bit against the Giants last week in what was a little bit of a disappointing game for Cincinnati. 5 catches for 72 yards on 6 targets and failed to score, but obviously dealing with multi-touchdown potential any given slate and a tremendous, tremendous receiver with a great connection with Burrow. T. Higgins has been involved since he returned. He scored twice in week 5, caught 9 balls for 83 yards on a whopping 14 targets that week. 10 targets the week before in week 4. That was after a soft entry that saw him catch just 3 of 6 opportunities for 39 yards, but played 54 snaps in the week 3 game against Washington. Against the Giants, he caught 7 for 77 yards on 7 targets. Solid little roulette number there. Higgins is the clear number 2 in this passing attack, but he gains plenty of targets per game. Technically, in the short sample, he's out-targeted Jamar Chase since coming back, 9.3 to 7.0. Gaining 7 yards per target on a 9.2 yard ADOT with the 2 touchdowns in his pocket already. And again, a lot of familiarity with Burrow. Love the upside for him. I just question how much Cleveland's able to feed the upside for a Burrow +2. We've got Chase Brown. We've got Zach Moss. Dual-headed running back situation here. It's been a basically even split so far this season, despite the fact that Brown has been easily the better of the two in terms of actually rushing the football. The stark difference is right there. 5.5 yards per rush attempt for Brown over his 8.5 carries a game. 3.6 yards per rush attempt for Moss on his 10.5 carries a game. Brown's outgaining him by 10 yards on 2 fewer carries per game. I almost said half the carries. That would have been wrong. Brown scored 3 rushing touchdowns. The Moss's 2 rushing touchdowns. He's got a little bounce in his game. 2 yards after contact per attempt versus the 1.1. He's gaining 3.5 yards before contact per attempt. He's involved in the passing game, but so is Moss. 2.5 targets a game versus 3.3. Brown gained a little bit of upside last week, but it could be deceptive. He carried the ball 10 times versus the 6 times that Moss carried it. He was targeted 3 times in the passing game versus the 1 time that Moss was targeted, and he outsnapped Moss 32 to 24. That was the first time that he outsnapped Moss all season. Moss fumbled the ball going into the beginning of the second half and kind of rode the pine the rest of the way. I don't think they're going to bench him for the rest of time just for 1 fumble. Does it maybe shove a few additional carries in Brown's direction? Sure, but that continues to be a relatively even job share there. Until some actual further notice. They've both got a receiving touchdown on the board on slightly negative ADOTs. They've given a little bit of upside on 2.5 and 3.3 targets a game. But until we get a little clarity, hopefully it comes around Chase Brown, the better of the 2 players. It's really kind of a hands-off situation outside of just trying to extract a little bit of value. And in that case, I would lean toward Brown. He rates his RB 16 by points, 13 by points per dollar on DraftKings, 18-13 on FanDuel. So there is price-based appeal there. In a game where they're heavily favored, 6-point favorites, 42-point total, you can easily see Cleveland scoring twice through Burrow, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins, and then just burning clock time in the second half, which in that case, I think they kind of know what they've got on their hands with Zach Moss and probably feed Chase Brown a little bit. Overall, the team rates as a playable stack, 5-8 on DraftKings, 7-10 on FanDuel. But I do think they're knocked down a peg by the short matchup, by the limited game total in this one in a week with several really juicy totals. Wouldn't shock me if Chase had a multi-touchdown game. Wouldn't shock me if Chase Burrow came through as a quarterback +1 thin stack that ended up winning a slate. That would not be surprising in any way. If a very deep Cincinnati stack came through, and like with a Cleveland bring back play, let's say, that would be surprising. Easily best player on the board, Jamar Chase, for a bonus. Easy upside. But T. Higgins is right there. And I think T. Higgins is an underappreciated receiving option a lot of weeks. So if you're considering this team, if you're going there, you can see it right here. He rates as WR 15 by points, 13th by points per dollar on DraftKings is pretty significant savings at just 64. 25th by points per dollar is less than ideal on FanDuel. FanDuel's in on the secret. T's pretty good. But on DraftKings, that's a nice little buy for points per dollar. It's only 6 off of the points per dollar you're getting out of Jamar Chase. Not bad. Again, I do think that's more of an either or rather than a piling on. You can roll a few plus twos with those two receivers, of course, but the correct approach is probably going to be the thinner stack. And it's probably not going to be a radical stack like a draw the two receivers from Tampa, but not the quarterback kind of approach. I do think if you're going to do that with a team, this team's on that list of opportunities to do it with, but that is not the correct approach to DFS, despite it winning somebody $1 million a week or two ago. I don't want to burn all the good games early. Do we have that one next? That one? All right, we at least get Seattle, Atlanta down there. Yeah, we can do this one here. It's just a lot of good games on this slate, really. Zip this up over here in the notes. Hit the like button if you get a chance. If you're new here, if you happen to be one of the 15 people who's never been here, or out of the 15 people, if you happen to be a new person who's never been here before, the site is rotoscouts.com. Definitely worth checking out, in my humble opinion, as the person who creates it and puts every piece of content up there. Every piece of content, every data point for every single main slate: football, baseball, hockey. Right now, hockey and football are live for today, or for tomorrow's main slate and for tonight's hockey main slate. I haven't been projecting single game baseball just because it's so straightforward. Just roster whoever's in the lineup. There you go. And everybody knows who the good hitters are. But multi-game baseball slates we're still projecting. Don't know if we'll get any more of them. Don't think we will. NBA starts up on Tuesday. No time like the present to dive in for less than $1 a day on any of our plans. Gives you access to every single piece of content, every data point for all of the sports that we cover. So you're getting basketball, hockey, and football going forward starting this week. Under $1 a day, weekly, monthly, quarterly plans available. Rotoscouts.com. Also check out our sim partners over at acemind.io. Those guys are doing great work. Promo code Rotoscouts, all in caps, gives you 20% off your first month over there. What's up, WW Fresh? Got fourth place in the $25 single entry last week at Knox. Nice. Yeah, we were talking about that now. He came through with that touchdown for us that we talked about. Yep. I thought of you when he scored that touchdown. I was like, oh, I hope that guy played that Knox play. Coverage on Panthers defense sets up beautiful for Ertz. Nice short passes. No. I'll take your word on that. I don't pay a ton of attention to Mason Rudolph picking up the start for Tennessee. That's interesting. A little change there. I don't pay a ton of attention to defensive scheming. If you ask me to name 3 players on a defense on any given team in the league, I might not be able to do it. Probably wouldn't be able to do it, I would say. I really just look at defenses as just the monolith that they represent against these offenses, just because that's the nature of how I attack this. So does that scheme nicely for Ertz? Sure. Is Ertz just a heavily involved tight end with a pretty decent price point and upside for scoring against a very bad defense anyway? Yes. So that's just more, I take a little bit lighter of a look at it than digging into, there's just only so many hours in the day that I can spend on this stuff, quite honestly, and looking at defensive scheming is not on that list right now. But that just, anything like that we can find to thread in there just further supports what already looks like a good play, right? So anytime you can find some supporting upside, it makes sense. Is there any merit in fading the Lions-Minnesota game with such concentrated ownership? I love that game, and we're about to talk about it. There are multiple games with 50-plus point totals. Like I was saying, this one and the Seattle-Atlanta game, I have more faith that both sides deliver in their just competitive shootout-oriented kind of games. So I probably wouldn't I wouldn't full fade. If you're building one lineup, can you dance around this game? Sure, because it's a very deep slate. There are tons of equivalent options, but Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, you can see it for yourself right there, how highly projected both those guys are. Right? I mean, those are killer marks. And both of these teams have effective downboard weapons. Jordan Addison not drawing a poor projection. He'd be the lead receiver on a lot of teams with those marks and just with his general talent. Same thing with Jameson Williams on the other side. You've got the dual-headed running back here. You've got Sam Laporta, who might go by the wayside a little bit more than he ought to. Solid projection for Sammy. I still have plenty of faith based on what I saw last year and what I know the talent is. Even with diminished volume this season and diminished output so far, rates out pretty well for our numbers here, and I like the upside. So I do think that it's worth considering. The approach that I would take is maybe if you're looking at like across a bunch of lineups, you look at the full exposure, 15% popularity for the full stack, right? So undercut that a little bit. Put in 10% of that stack, whatever the numbers might be. And then within that 10%, start focusing in toward getting combinations of some of the lower the lower owned players. So if Laporta is truly a little bit less owned than some of the receiving options, or if say David Montgomery doesn't pick up quite as much ownership as he should for his significant touchdown scoring potential, a downboard option for a cheap price like Tim Patrick could get involved at very, very low ownership. So there are ways to thread things in and out that can shake that up even at high ownership. And you've also got a lot of other lineup spots to deal with. So ultimately, it really does come down to what do your combinations look like more than it comes down to can I use this team or not when it comes to popularity. You can always use something even if it's popular. And popularity usually just means it's a really good option as far as the raw potential of it. You just need to make sure that you're getting your leverage, getting your differentiation in other ways within that lineup if you go to these chalky pieces. And that's kind of the name of the game with the running back spot and then all these high-end receivers this week. You're either going to some of those very specific mid-board, mid-price running backs like the Chuba Hubbards and the Tony Pollards of the world, or you can pivot and pay up and maybe gain a little differentiation. And it's the same thing that with the opposite direction, depending on which decision you make at the top of the receiver board. But this game, again, premium game with a 51-point total. Minnesota favored by just 2.5 in a home game makes it basically a virtual tie on the Vegas board. A lot of expectations for scoring on both sides of this one. WW Fresh added some context to his question. I understand what with such high price points in Jefferson and St. Brown, you don't think there is any merit to the fade. They both could get 20 FanDuel points and still not be in the winner. My concern is not only popularity on players, but they are the highest priced players on the slate, usually a red flag. Yeah, they do have to do more to fully pay off their prices, but I don't think those are broken prices for what the true ceilings for those players are. For one, within the median projections, they rate out in a points per dollar sense. Jefferson WR2 on DraftKings and 5 on FanDuel by points per dollar. Amon-Ra 8 and 6 across sites, a little bit behind, but those are still top 10 ratings, top 5 for Jefferson on both sites by points per dollar. So while they are the highest priced receivers on the slate, they're not necessarily even correctly priced for what their ceiling looks like, what their median projection looks like. So I think, again, you can just pedal down with those guys. I think they are weapons in this slate, and they're very, very likely touchdown scorers, or at least they're volume monsters. With tons and tons of people on them, can an undercut again pay? Yes, for sure. In one lineup, if you're building one, can a full fade pay off for those reasons? For sure. No doubt about it. Could you go to a DK or Tyler Lockett even to fill one of those spots? Jaden Reed to fill another one? And then if you want a third receiver, say you were planning on drawing 3 receivers out of this game and replacing them, chalky Terry McLaurin in another spot there. All 3 of those guys have equivalent-ish upsides for lower prices and probably a little less popularity. You can throw Drake London into that mix. You could throw a lot of big names. Jamar Chase, obviously, from the Cincinnati game, and T. Higgins as well from that game. Malik Neighbors from the Giants is on that list. Pieces from San Francisco. There's a lot to work with on this slate. So you can absolutely go that direction. You're taking a little bit of maybe probability and converting it to a little bit maybe of possibility. And again, I don't think that Jefferson and Amon-Ra are necessarily mispriced. But when you do pile on, it's a sharp question. When you pile popularity on top of difficult to reach price points, then yeah, your leverage structure does become a little bit wobbly there. I have no issues whatsoever with London, Neighbors, and Metcalf. I think that's totally great. And like you say, the ceiling is maybe not completely equivalent if you mathed it out to the extreme, but it's approaching equivalent and the targets are there. No reason to think that wouldn't succeed. So, yeah, no issues with it. Greg B saying, yeah, fitting St. Brown and Jefferson is really difficult. And I totally agree, which is why it's good news that on both sides, we've got capable second men like Jamison Williams and Jordan Addison at lower prices. So I think going with top guy, second guy configurations in back and forth stacks makes a ton of sense. I think going with both second guys is viable. I think approaching the tight end position a little bit, Hawkinson's out, we'll take him off the board. But approaching the tight end position with Laporta is kind of interesting. It's just a lot of ways to target this game. Yeah, sure thing, bud. It's what we're here for. Another, on FanDuel anyway, another receiver that you can get that is, trajectory-wise, skill-wise, reputation-wise, name brand-wise on that same list at an even cheaper price is Devontae in that Jets game late night. It's only on FanDuel. You have to play it in Showdown Slate on DraftKings, but he's another guy on that list, and he comes at a cheaper price. We'll see what we get coming off of the fake injury, but I think the upside's there. So looking at this game in full, we've done a lot of talking about it already, but we'll break it down real quick here. You can see tons of really strongly ranked players. Sammy Darnold is QB7, but 2 by points per dollar on both sites. Jared Goff, QB3 on DraftKings, and QB3 by points and 1 by points per dollar for just $7,800 on the FanDuel slate. There's significant expectations revolving around this game. Goff has completed 71% of 30 attempts per game for 266 yards. 8.9 yards per pass attempt is a significant passing yards total. 7.1 intended air yards per attempt. He's got fantastic downfield weapons. On the other side, Sammy Darnold completing 64% of his 27.4 pass attempts per game. 11 touchdown passes to just 4 interceptions. 9.1 intended air yards per attempt. 8.1 yards per pass attempt. Sam Darnold, what a story. I'm just happy for Sam Darnold. I'm not a Jets fan. I'm not even a Sam Darnold fan, but I like seeing an underdog story. He got the job through a little bit of luck and happenstance after backing up out in San Francisco, and obviously, picked up a little bit sitting on the sidelines. Big sponge effect there. He's always had the tools, but he's kind of put it together this season, and I'm kind of a believer. I really am. Double J's put the ball in the end zone 4 times on the season. Addison missed some games, but he's got a touchdown on the year, and he's already racked up a 17.9 yard average depth of target as a significant downfield option for this team. 23.5% of the air yards on his 5.3 targets per game since returning. Jefferson's the volume monster, though. 8.6 targets per game on a 13.3 yard ADOT amounts to nearly 50% of the air yards. With McLaurin is over 50%. Jefferson's at 47.7. Amon-Ra falls short of that. So does Jamison on the other side. You can see Jamison actually outduels Amon-Ra in terms of air yards. I'm trying to remember if anybody else was over 50%. Either way, that's obviously a monster share of air yards and downfield opportunities and scoring and big play opportunities, which is another reason that you consider players like Justin Jefferson, just with that monster big play ability. A lot of other receivers who don't have quite as competitive of a portion of downfield targeting need to do a little bit more in terms of volume to really get there, where Jefferson can break off a couple of big plays even if he's not having a great game and suddenly change the nature of his score. Addison's the same way with his downfield ability. Aaron Jones has carried the ball 14.2 times a game for 70 yards. 4.9 yards per rush attempt is not insignificant. He's been probably underrated this year. He's picked up 4 targets a game. It's 18 and change potential touches per game. He's got a receiving touchdown and a rushing touchdown. The output overall has been limited with the amount of times he's been in the end zone, but there is potential there given how good he's been at gaining yards. He's limited in practice on Thursday and Friday. He's dealing with a hamstring issue. They did trade for Cam Akers, who you guys know I don't think is all that good. Akers was gaining just 3.7 yards per rush attempt on 8 carries a game. He put the ball in the end zone once. Didn't really demonstrate any value in getting an opportunity. He's got a receiving touchdown on 1.4 targets a game. I think his volume is going to be limited unless Jones doesn't play, in which case he probably takes most of the upside opportunities. Ty Chandler's also there. He's gained just 3.5 yards per rush attempt on 8.4 carries a game. He's basically the same guy. They were like, oh, Ty's a nice guy. We like what he's doing out there on his limited opportunities. Let's go get the exact same guy. So I don't really think that either one of those guys picks up a tremendous amount of volume if Jones doesn't go. But Jones himself is playable, assuming he's out there. Let's see if we got news on him. Still questionable. Yeah, just still questionable, dealing with a hammy. But again, did practice Thursday and Friday after skipping practice on Wednesday. I think he's out there, if I had to guess. We'll keep an eye on it. We will get, with no Hawkinson coming back, Johnny Munt and Josh Oliver will continue to split limited shares of tight end targets. On average, Munt is playing 63% of the snaps. Oliver's playing 57%, and they're drawing 3.6 combined targets per game and catching 2 and change passes per game. They've got a touchdown apiece, but the volume, the potential for scoring is pretty limited with a team that will probably turn toward the wide receiver, the running back position to do their scoring. If they get in real close, maybe you pick up a red zone opportunity. Jalen Naylor scored 3 times already this season on just 2.2 targets per game, and 11.8 yard ADOT is a significant downfield weapon. Last week he went untargeted. He ran 21 routes, and when you're thinking that he's running down the field pretty significantly, he's doing a lot of sprinting in his 37 snaps in week 5. That was back before the bye week. He played just 14 snaps in week 4. Ran 11 routes, was targeted twice, caught 1 ball for 31 yards. Had 3 straight games with a score, though, to start the season, weeks 1, 2, and 3. 1 catch for 21 and a score, 3 catches, 54 and a score, and 3 catches for 31 and a touchdown on 1, 4, and 4 targets in those games. So he is a receiver that, for a cheap price, could turn nothing into something in an awful hurry. He's not off the board, but he's just kind of a tack-on option in a couple of Minnesota lineups. In no way is Jalen Naylor a priority in this game. Amon-Ra, 8.4 targets a game. Jameson, 5.8 targets a game, but again, basically double the depth of target. They've got a nice little tiered system with Amon-Ra operating on a 7.4 yard ADOT, picking up 28% of the air yards on higher volume, and then Jameson getting down the field, 14.1 yard ADOT for 37.5% of the air yards. They've each scored 3 times in the passing attack. Jahmyr Gibbs has a receiving touchdown on the board. Sammy Laporta's got 1. Laporta's only been targeted 3 times a game. Again, the volume has been a little bit more limited than we expected this season. Came into the season as, one of the top tight ends in football. Last week he caught just 1 pass, but he turned it into 52 yards and a touchdown. That was on 1 target. Before the bye in week 5, back in week 4, he had 4 catches for 53 yards on 4 targets. Those were season highs for him. So again, the output's been thin, but he's going to get his looks. And on a high grade offense, if the limited targeting, the 3 targets a game, is concerning people, if the still not crazy high, but still high enough price scares people off, I'm happy to grab additional shares and just ride the touchdown potential. He's only seen 2 red zone targets on the season, but he's a highly skilled, highly capable tight end who was super involved last year. I don't think that's all just gone away. Tim Patrick, just 2.5 targets a game, but does it on a downfield opportunity. 12.8 yard average depth, 11% of the air yard share. He was targeted 3 times, caught all 3 of them in week 6, 68 yards on the board. Before the bye week, he had 2 catches on 2 targets for 52. So another player with just big play opportunities, big play upside. That's playable in DFS tournaments. It's not great, but he's not expensive. 35, 48. As the second man in to differentiate a Goff plus Amon-Ra stack. There's no reason you can't play Tim Patrick for a few darts. Brock Wright, limited volume, 1.8 targets a game, 2.2 going in Khalifa Raymond's direction. Raymond did catch 4 of 6 targets in week 6, gained 73 yards. That was by far his biggest game. Prior to that, he had 3 catches back in week 2 for 27 yards, only 1 catch in between for 9 yards. So pretty hit and miss option there, and we've got a lot more miss than hit in the Khalifa Raymond play. Of course, all of this is completely skipped over the ridiculously good dual-headed running back situation. Jahmyr Gibbs carrying the ball 13.2 times per game. He's got 3 rushing touchdowns on the season. David Montgomery went out and doubled that total so far. Montgomery's carried the ball 15 times a game, 6 rushing touchdowns this season. He's gained 70 rush yards. Basically, so has Jahmyr Gibbs. It's a rounding issue between the two. 5.3 yards per rush attempt for the younger player, 4.7 yards per rush attempt for the grizzled old veteran. Montgomery does more of his rushing straight ahead and busting through the line, but he's still capable. He's still explosive. He gains two targets a game, 9.4 yards per target in the passing game. Hasn't found the end zone, and Gibbs does get more of the pass volume with 3.6 targets a game for 2.8 catches. Both guys operate around the line of scrimmage. Gibbs has given us 5.8 yards per target in his receiving volume, but he's been in the end zone once. These guys are absolutely both playable on any given week. The touchdown upside for these two players is significant. I don't love the idea of putting them both in a lineup, as I've said a number of different times. For one, they're both fairly expensive, but they rank out for points as RB10 and RB13 on DraftKings, by points per dollar as 10.15. On FanDuel, that's 12.14 and 18.21 by value. So you can see, high price proposition to put them both in, and they would cannibalize one another's opportunities to some degree. But you can absolutely get both players to provide capable performances. It's just putting them both in doesn't necessarily equate to a slate winning total when you add them together. But either guy can be an individual running back with a contribution to a slate winning lineup with their touchdown scoring. Between the two, it's a very slight lean toward Gibbs, I think, just on the yardage, the potential yards per play, but it's not like Montgomery's far off the pace, and the veteran's definitely done a lot of scoring for us over the years. So, like both options, overall Detroit ranks as stack 1 by points and 6 by points per dollar on DraftKings, while Minnesota checks in as stack 2 by points, 3 by points per dollar on DraftKings. Detroit's 4-5 on FanDuel. Minnesota is 3-3 on FanDuel. Both these teams significantly playable. Love the appeal on all sides. I will definitely try to get to some. I will definitely consider what the Jefferson and Amon-Ra pairing does for a lineup as far as upside versus cost benefit. But a lot to work with in this game. Love this game. Up and down, really, the depth chart. Overall, top option for a bonus is difficult to call in this one. I will say it's Justin Jefferson. Got to give it to the guy who ranks out top by points, right? But a lot of ways that bonus could be split, and you could get multiple bonuses in this one. Where'd my chat go? Ooh, we got a little rivalry brewing between Alexander Bayer and WW Fresh in the chat. Yeah, Tony Pollard's not going to carry every single time for that offense. I do like that spot a lot for Pollard. I don't think we have much. Yeah, Chestnut, not a lot of meat on the bone as far as the projections go. But as you point out, you're not just going by raw projection necessarily. On the season, we haven't seen that much opportunity yet. I forgot what it looked like. Let's see. Last time out, carried the ball just once on 3 snaps. Ran 1 route. That was his first carry and his first route run. He played entirely on special teams the first 4 weeks, so we got nothing to work with there. But yeah, the opportunity is going to exist for him to carry the ball at least a couple of times. Does that make him like an ideal DFS option? I've talked about this before. I do tend to lean in a little bit more toward trying to get those like super dart throw type plays from receiver positions where just the thin opportunities, 1 target does not necessarily equal 1 carry. It's not exactly like the 1 beer, 1 shot, one mixed drink thing as far as drunk driving goes. I think that there's a disparity between 1 target and one rushing opportunity. So I tend to lean toward receiving or pass catchers anyway for that role. Chestnut really hasn't done anything in 3 years in the NFL. I'm just looking at some of the numbers. 9 carries in his rookie year back in 2022 across 6 games. He gained 12 yards. That's 1.3 per rush attempt. He was targeted 3 times and caught all 3 passes for 41 yards. Had a 20-plus yard reception. That's the best I can give him. A little bit of skill in the kick return game. 215 kick return yards that year. 3 games, no carries, no targets in 2023. 5 games, just the 1 carry, the 1 target so far this year. So you're dealing with a really, really thin option if you go that route. I wouldn't call it like completely unplayable because odds are the ball lands in his hands between 5 and 7 times in this game. But Pollard is capable of carrying a decent workload. He's averaged 15.6 carries and 3.8 targets per game. I know we skipped ahead, by the way. Spears was picking up 6.6 carries and 2.4 targets a game. So again, call it 8 to 9 potential touches that were going in Spears' direction that need a new home. I would say 2 or 3 of I would say that 2 or 3 of those go toward Pollard, with the remaining shares going in Chestnut's direction. Do with that what you will. Let's get back to that game we were on, though. Another high-end game, 47.5 point total. Again, in a lot of other weeks, this would be like the highlight matchup of the week. It's kind of just getting overlooked in some ways. And I don't know necessarily that that's correct. I do think those other spots are naturally more appealing, but there's a ton to work with in this game. Jordan Love ranks as QB 2 across both sides by raw points for one thing. Jaden Reed right behind him is WR7 by points and 4 by points per dollar on DraftKings, 5 and WR1 by points per dollar on FanDuel. I love the upside for Jaden Reed, especially if people are not going to him as significantly as they ought to be. If everybody's focused on the Jeffersons of the world and the Amon-Ra's of the world, like WW Fresh was pointing out, definitely makes some sense to consider some Jaden Reed shares at lower ownership and a slightly lower cost for a pretty similar scoring upside. Reed's been highly, highly involved this season. 5.7 targets per game. He's also picked up a carry and a half on the ground. He scored a rushing touchdown this season. He's gained 8.8 yards before contact and 3.4 yards after contact for 12.2 yards per rush attempt on the limited volume. Obviously, he's more of a receiver, but it's nice to know that there's a little bit of scoring padding potential and big play potential in the rush game for him too. 6 targets last game, 5.7 a game, catches 4.5 of them, a 13-yard per target average on a 7.4-yard ADOT. He scored three receiving touchdowns, leads the team as far as skill player touchdowns go, but they do spread the ball out. 2.3 targets a game and 18 carries per game go in Josh Jacobs' direction for one. That's 20 potential touches, 20-plus potential touches any given week. That is significant. He's gained 4.3 yards per attempt. He has not been bad. He's gotten kind of a little bit of a stink on him, I think, over the last couple of weeks, just because the scoring output really hasn't been significant. Maybe the DFS, the fantasy scoring output, hasn't been tremendous. 1 rushing touchdown, no receiving touchdowns on the year. I get it, but this is a volume-based game. So for 64.73 as like an off-the-radar, mid-level Tony Pollard replacement type running back, I don't completely hate the Josh Jacobs option. I think he finishes the season with more than 1 rushing touchdown. I think he finishes the season with probably a receiving touchdown in his pocket. 2.3 targets a game is not nothing. He's gained 7.2 yards per target on a negative ADOT. He's an involved player. Any way you slice it, it's just about that volume potential for the cost. So I still like going to Josh Jacobs, but this is a pass-happy team. This is a very significant passing offense. I'm on the Tennessee Buffalo game. Green Bay has, for one, they've scored 27 points a game. That ranks 7th overall. They've gained 5.1 yards per rush attempt. That's 6th. So it speaks to Jacobs' value. It also speaks downboard a little bit for Manny Wilson down there. But they've gained 8.1 yards per pass attempt, 6th ranked overall, and they do a lot of their scoring through the air. You've got Christian Watson back in the fold. He's only picked up 2.4 targets per game on some missed opportunities, some missed games in there. When he's been out there, the volume's been a little bit light as he gets back up to speed. He picked up 4 targets last game, caught 3 of them for 68 yards and a touchdown. He missed week 5 rather. Played just 9 snaps in week 4. 32 snaps in week 3, ran 15 routes, caught 2 targets, picked up 2 targets, caught both of them for 67 yards. Had a receiving touchdown in week 1. But again, we're running pretty limited routes so far this season. Peaked at 27 back in week 1, but bounced back up again to 24 last time out. So while the volume hasn't been great, the receiver is very talented. And with the idea of upward trajectory on the opportunities on a player with a 15.3 yard ADOT, who despite the limited opportunities is still at 12.36% of the air yards and putting up 12.3 yards per target so far with 2 touchdowns, definitely can get to some cheap Christian Watson. 49.59, not expensive enough for that player. Particularly interesting for the value on DraftKings. 30th by points, but 12th by points per dollar. 30th by points and 21st by points per dollar on FanDuel. Romeo Doubs, not exactly the same kind of ranking as far as the value, but definitely, top 40 receiver is always playable in a stack that ranks 9th by points and 4th by value on both sides, I'll add. Doubs has picked up just under 5 targets a game. He had 4 last game. A 13.1 yard ADOT. All these guys get up and get down the field outside of the tight end Tucker Kraft, who operates underneath on just a 4.4 yard ADOT, and Reed at a 7.4, but with dynamic ability and game-breaking ability and the ability to get up and get down the field if he needs to. So love all the depth options through Watson, Doubs, and Wicks here. Doubs has scored twice. Wicks has scored 3 times. Wicks comes in questionable. He's dealing with a shoulder injury. Tucker Kraft is dealing with a groin injury. He was limited in practice. Christian Watson is dealing with an ankle still. He was technically limited. Make sure we don't have any news. Reed, Watson, Doubs, all clean reports. Kraft off the injury report. Only Dontavian Wicks is lingering on the injury report. Did practice on a limited basis on Friday. Again, dealing with a shoulder. But this is the deepest receiving group in football, so they've got easy ways to work around Dontavian Wicks. Maybe he's out there running a few routes, and maybe as a decoy. Maybe he actually sees a couple of targets. 5.3 a game so far this season puts him, second on the team behind Reed, an 11-point yard ADOT and 3 touchdowns on the season. But he has only picked up 4.2 yards per target overall, despite the deep targeting. So it's been mixed results from Dontavian Wicks, but he is a very skilled young player. Ranks in the top 40 across sites or thereabouts. He's definitely playable if he suits up. If he doesn't, I think it just concentrates the shares across these excellent options. So even if Wicks doesn't suit up, you've got 5 workable skill players there, all of whom will have opportunity in the passing game, all of whom have been significant enough contributors to go with a very fairly priced Jordan Love. Packers look really strong on both sides. They're going up against a team that's allowed just 6.2 yards per pass attempt, though. They have a 25% pressure rate so far this season for Houston. They've picked up a solid 19 sacks already. So it's not a total pushover as far as the defense goes. Green Bay's going to have to work to get theirs. That 9.55% sack rate ranks 4th overall. 2.78% interception rate. They've picked off 5 passes this year. That ranks 11th. Not nothing. Overall on the season, they have allowed just 22.5 points per game while scoring 23.8. Ranks 15th defensively and 14th offensively. I feel like the Houston offense has been a little bit more of a letdown, while their defense has been not outstanding, but fine. 4.6 yards per rush attempt, 6.2 per pass attempt. The pass attempt number is very good. It ranks 3rd overall. They've allowed... Yeah, they've been a little bit break, don't bendy, though, against the pass. They've allowed just 0.7 rushing touchdowns per game, despite all the yardage that they're allowing in the rushing attack. And they've allowed 2.7 overall touchdowns per game. So that gives them 2 passing touchdowns against in each game. So that alone could potentially feed the upside for Green Bay's passing attack. They work their way down the field and they're in close. They can throw it into the end zone against this team. Downboard, if Wicks doesn't play, you might see a little bit of an uptick in opportunity for a Bo Melton. But it would probably be limited. Again, I think it would be more ideal to just get a concentration of opportunities. Melton was targeted twice. He caught, targeted twice. He caught 1 pass for 6 yards last week. He's had 1 catch in each of the last 3. He had a 28-yard grab in week 4 against Minnesota. He's playing a decent number of snaps, 29 and 26 each of the last 2 weeks, but only 11 and 8 routes run. And again, targeted just twice in the offense in those 2 weeks. Manuel Wilson's only gotten on the field for 6 or 7 carries each week. Limited opportunities, but a talented player, gaining 5 yards per rush attempt so far. If anything was to happen to Josh Jacobs up top, you definitely have a good running back on your hands with Manuel Wilson. Right now, he just ranks in the 30s. There is a little bit of potential for him to just break one, but he would have to break one to deliver any kind of scoring. He's seen 1.5 targets a game, 7 carries a game, again, gaining 5 yards per rush attempt. So the opportunity to break one is there, given the, not the non-zero touches. But if he was ever to get, say, reliably 12 to 15 touches, he'd become a really interesting value play. Right now, he's just a dart. On the Houston side, C.J. Stroud, top-end QB, ranks 9th by points, but slips to 16 and 14 by points per dollar. He's completing 68% of 35 passes a game. He's thrown 10 touchdowns against 4 interceptions, 7.5 intended air yards against 7.6 yards per attempt, 4.6 air yards per attempt. He's been completely serviceable, working in tandem with Steph Diggs and Tank Dell right now, in the absence of Nico Collins, who was his favorite target. Diggs has scored 3 times. 2 of them came in the big week 1 performance. Then he waited until, I believe it was last week, to score again. Yeah. 2 touchdowns on 6 grabs in week 1, playing with Nico Collins out there. Was effective, but not great over the next 5 games. And then in week 6, he caught 6 passes for 77 yards and his 3rd score of the season. 7 targets in that one, 6 of 8 for 82 yards in week 5, 5 of 9 for 69. Had a 10-catch, 94-yard game in week 3. So the involvement's definitely been there for Steph Diggs. They went out and got him for a reason. 8 targets a game. He's putting up. He's put up 8.2 yards per target so far. 3 touchdowns on 25% of the air yards, with increasing shares as time goes on here in the absence of Nico. He's definitely the top option in this passing attack. They've got a very capable running back in Joe Mixon, who does soak up a lot of volume. He's another 20-plus potential opportunity guy. 17.3 carries a game, 3.7 targets a game. Definitely puts Mixon on the board for shares. He's had a couple monsters already this season. 159 yards on 30 carries with a touchdown in his pocket in week 1. Also caught 3 balls for 19 yards in that one. Went out after just 29 snaps in week 2. Had gained just 25 yards on 9 carries. Missed the next 3 games. Came back last week. Almost an identical output to... lighter output. 13 carries for 102 yards. I was remembering somebody else. 13 carries, 102 yards, and a touchdown on the board. There's somebody that I wrote about that missed like the same bookend games that came back and delivered like the exact same opportunity. I forget who it was. Now it's going to bug me. It's in the article. Check out the full 20-some-odd thousand word team-by-team breakdown. Basically, all this stuff that comes out of me on these shows is in written form for you to digest maybe a little bit more at your own pace, up on the website, rotoscouts.com, in the groups article. Give you optimizer groups, setting basis for running optimizers, and I give you full game notes and thoughts about each of the teams. And I've added some interesting statistics, defensive capabilities for the opponent, just the breakdown of pass and rush distributions. Right now, Houston's running the ball just under 40% of the time, 60% pass. So both these teams do lean into the pass, despite having heavily involved and very, very capable running backs. A couple of veteran guys drawing 18 carries and significant opportunities in the past. Wouldn't surprise me if either of these guys was involved in a Slate winning lineup. Mixon scored twice on the ground so far. He's gaining 5.5 yards per rush attempt, 95 yards a game, putting up 6.7 yards per target in the passing game. Definitely involved. Definitely interesting. Tank Dell has run the ball a couple of times, 1.2 rushes per game for 5 yards per rush attempt, but his involvement is more in the passing game. He's got a touchdown on the board in the passing game this season, 9.4 yard ADOT, 6 target average on the season. I forgot his name's Nathan something. I want to say Nathaniel. The one guy I forgot to change, I think. 18.59% of the air yards going in Tank's direction. Another 15% going toward the tight end, Dalton Schultz. 7.8 targets a game is definitely significant involvement for him. That's a 7.8 yard ADOT, 5 targets a game. Losing my place here. 5 targets a game on 7.8 yard A-dot yields the 15% air yard share. He hasn't scored yet this season, but he had fairly significant involvement last year, and he is a cheap option at the position. Ranks as T9 and 6 on DraftKings, 9-7 at the tight end spot on the FanDuel slate. Getting a little points per dollar upside out of the Texans defense. That's not the most appealing opportunity in the world. They've been a relatively high-scoring defense based on their sack rate and their ability to limit yardage, but I don't love that spot for 26-37. I do think it's a playable value across 150 lineups. You could definitely have some, but in one, I don't think that's your go-to value defense. Same thing on the other side. Xavier Hutchinson, just limited opportunities so far. 1.3 targets a game on just a 4.9 yard A-dot amounts to just 2.46% of the air yards. He's delivered just 4.3 yards per target despite a 4.9 yard A-dot. That is not good. Dameon Pierce had a decent game returning to action last week. He had basically one very big play. Where is he? Ended up gaining 76 yards on just 8 carries. Scored a touchdown. Caught his lone target for just 1 yard, but broke a big play. It's always nice to see he is a capable running back. He's just a little bit clipped by volume by Joe Mixon being in the on the roster. 5.5 carries a game is not overly significant, but he's gained 46 yards a game. He's got a touchdown on the board in his limited opportunities. 8.4 yards per rush attempt if we want to be technical about things. It's because he's only played 2 games and a total of 27 snaps. But he's on the board as a dart throw of a value running back against a rush defense that is a little gettable here. What are they giving up? 4.3 yards. More gettable with the pass. 19th ranked, 7.2 yards per pass attempt. They've gained a little bit of pressure. They've picked up 16 sacks. They have been significant in terms of scoring defense for DFS, primarily based on that interception total. 9 picks already this season. That ranks second with a 4.35% interception rate. The sack rate at 7.17 ranks just 15th, middle of the board. And that shows you, when you start playing with some of these numbers, 22.4 is obviously not far off, 16 is not far off of the 19 sacks that the Houston defense has, but that was a much higher sack rate overall in terms of just ranking it out. So it is important to consider, again, with football being fairly short sample in a limited season, it's fair to consider what those totals actually are against one another, and there's not a lot of daylight between 16 sacks and 19 sacks. Top option for a bonus. Joe Mixon. I think that still holds. Just because, as much as I like Jaden Reed, he is more of a short yardage, big play kind of a receiver. They spread the ball around quite a bit in Green Bay. A lot of mouths to feed on the Houston side, but Mixon is the clear-cut guy who gets volume there. He's been over 100 yards twice in his 2.5 games. Wouldn't shock me if Jacobs got there as well. Wouldn't shock me if Diggs or Tank got there. But I think I lean slightly toward Mixon. A lot of stackability across both of these teams. Houston ranks 4th by points and 10th by value on DraftKings, 2nd by points and 11th by value on FanDuel. On the other side, 9-4 across both sites, points and value. So 2 very, very significant stacks that, again, could potentially fall off people's radar with just all the focus around some of those 50-point games on this one. 47.5 points in a 2.5-point spread game against 2 teams that could potentially be on a playoff collision course sometime in their future. Love the upside. Quentin Johnston now doubtful, makes Ladd an even stronger start on Monday. Let's not get into Monday yet. I got a London game to think about at some point before then. Gofius puts it the other way. Green Bay, too many wide receivers. You could also definitely take that approach. I mean, if they concentrated targets to just 2 of those guys would stand out for quality. But I like the deep receiver room. I think for DFS purposes, especially with all of those guys operating at a very high level and with their willingness to spread out targeting and touchdown opportunities across all those guys, I think it makes them easier to get to because you'll always have at least one guy who's not owned properly, who's not priced properly. So it just gives them a lot of flexibility. It gives them a lot to work with on any given slate. So I like a deep receiver group. And again, I do tend to get my values from receiver in a lot of cases. So that just feeds that upside for me. Alex, I'm sure you heard me as I went through it, but Wick's still questionable to play. So just keep an eye on that one. KC San Fran, again, 2 out of the last 5 Super Bowls have been played between these two teams. KC was there another time. 3 out of the last 5 Super Bowls have involved the Chiefs, as I'm sure you guys know. Not breaking any ground here. But obviously, this is a very high-profile NFL game between these two franchises. 47.5 point total, just a 1-point spread in San Francisco. It's a very interesting game that's going to get a lot of buzz. There are quality skill players up and down. There are 2 good quarterbacks. Patty Mahomes, obviously the star between these 2 quarterbacks, but Brock Purdy right there with him in terms of our rankings. Mahomes, QB 10-18 on DraftKings, 10-11 on FanDuel, while Purdy checks in 12-14 DK and 12-16 on FanDuel. Neither guy's like super playable, given how they rate. Despite this game having a hefty total, it only rates these teams into stacked 16 by points for the Chiefs on both sites, 19th and 20th by points per dollar. The Niners looking a little bit better is stacked 10 by points, but 13th on DraftKings by points per dollar, 15th by points per dollar on FanDuel. More than anything, I think that speaks to the depth of the slate. The Niners, tremendous options in multiple positions. The Chiefs, a little bit more thin than that. Travis Kelce still a standout in his position. Xavier Worthy, playable and interesting with explosive upside, but doesn't exactly rate well. Just inside the top 30 by points, just inside the top 40 by points per dollar. Kareem Hunt's been good in limited sample, but we don't really know what it looks like going forward. He's also going to be challenged by the return of Clyde Edwards-Helaire, probably. Got to keep an eye on that opportunity as well. Samaje Perine's still there to soak up a couple of targets from the backfield, maybe a couple of carries. Not exactly go-to running backs. Hunt, with the majority of the workload in projections, just ranks at 19-20 at running back, 19-24 on FanDuel. Juju, 42-35, 42-45 across sites. There really is, it's kind of a shiny object game that could be a little bit trappy, especially on the KC side. I do think Kansas City goes out there, does their thing, has a good chance to win the game. I don't think it's a situation where like Kansas City's bad all of a sudden. They just win games without necessarily having the best players. That's how Kansas City does. So far in the season, 15th ranked for points, 23.6 points a game. They've gained just 3.9 yards per rush attempt, 27th overall. That's pretty problematic. 7.7 yards per pass attempt. It ranks 9th, but it's not an outstanding number. It hasn't been the best version of Kansas City's offense, but again, it's kind of more of a case of maybe not needing to do that much and then a little bit of limitations around the receiving group. This is a team that you would love to see an Amari Cooper step into. Overall, their defense has been pretty sharp. They've allowed just 17 points a game. That ranks 6th, allowing just 3.7 yards per rush attempt to rank 4th, 6.7 yards per pass attempt to rank 13th. Despite a significant pressure rate, they haven't really, you can see their pressure rate at 32.6%. They've only picked up 9 sacks on the season. That ranks 29th, 5.08% sack rate, and their 2 interceptions don't exactly rate out well either. So Kansas City's defense, limiting opportunities as far as yardage and scoring. They've been effective for that, but they haven't really done a tremendous amount of DFS scoring on their own. The Niners just look better across the board. Jordan Mason's questionable. Dealing with, I want to say it's a shoulder. I think it's a shoulder. Let me get to the news. Yep, looks like he's off the injury report as of today. It is a shoulder, left shoulder issue. but not on the injury report anymore after a couple of limitations in practice. Should be A-OK to go. He's been a little bit diminished in his last two opportunities compared to the explosive upside we saw in the first few games. But, I mean, it's a matter of perspective. He played just 18 snaps in week 6, for one thing. He carried the ball 9 times and gained 73 yards. So it's not like that's actual limitation. It's just the opportunity was cut down. The week before, he played 40 snaps. He carried the ball 14 times for just 89 yards. That's still a fairly significant rush total. Still pretty productive. He caught 1 pass for 9 yards. It's not the ridiculous 123 yards on 24 carries he had the week before that with a touchdown, 2 catches for 37. 19 carries for 77 in week 3 kind of jibes more with the week 5 performance. 200-yard games in weeks 1 and 2. Significant explosive ability. Very, very good running back. Kind of unfair that they just had him stashed as a backup. 76, 8,800 across sites. He's expensive now, but he rates out well. Running back 8 by points on DraftKings, 11th by points per dollar, 7 and 9 on the FanDuel slate. He scored 3 times on the season. He's still gaining more than 100 yards a game on 19 carries a game, 5.3 yards per rush attempt. The involvement in the passing game is thin. We don't need him for that, but the rushing upside is monstrous, and he's got pretty significant touchdown scoring appeal as well. Debo carrying the ball 3.8 times a game, but just gaining 2.7 yards per rush attempt in his limited involvement on the ground. But he has scored in the rushing game. Every now and again, he'll poach a rushing touchdown, as will Kyle Juszczyk, who picked one up last week on his lone carry. He gained 5 yards. That was his first carry of the season. He's been more involved in the passing game, 2.3 targets per game, 5.1 yard average depth of target for 6.2 yards per target, but hasn't scored yet. Had one big play where he almost got in, but came up a couple yards short. Outside of that, it's just been a few targets here and there and limited overall involvement for Juszczyk down the board. Debo's actual involvement comes more in the passing attack. 6.4 targets per game versus the 6.8 that Brandon Ayuk has gotten, and the team-leading 7.0 that George Kittle's drawn. Between the 3 premium targets, Kittle's scored the most, 5 touchdowns on the season, pretty significant output for scoring. That comes with just an 8.1 yard per target number, 7.2 yard ADOT, and just 15% of the team's air yards. But the red zone targeting, the opportunities to catch touchdown passes, is really all we're looking for. He scored twice on 2 red zone targets last week. He scored once on 6 red zone targets in week 5. He scored once on 1 red zone target in week 4. You can see a pattern forming here. Missed week 3, but scored 1 touchdown on 2 red zone targets in week 2. Once they get in close, it's the George Kittle show in this offense this season. So Kittle on his own at the tight end position definitely warrants some shares in stacks. Highly, highly valuable player for a inoffensive price on both sides. Ayuk hasn't been in the end zone yet, but we know it's coming. 12.4 yard average depth of target for nearly 30% of the air yards to lead this team. He's the true field stretcher. Nearly 7 targets a game. Significant upside based on what we've seen from this player in the past. He caught 8 balls for 147 yards on 12 targets in week 5. He just failed to find the end zone, but pretty extreme upside there. And that's a ceiling game for him minus the touchdown. You put the touchdown on top of that or 2 touchdowns on top of that kind of output, but 12 targets, 8 catches is about right for a high upside game out of Brandon Ayuk. If he sees that, if you re-roll that opportunity, he gets in the end zone more often than not. Debo is a super dynamic player, putting up 10.5 yards per target on a 9.3 yard ADOT. He's got 1 receiving touchdown to go with the 1 rushing touchdown on the season. Missed a little bit of time and is dealing with a wrist issue, but should be full go. Carried the ball 4 times for 15 yards in week 6. Also caught 3 passes for 102 yards and a touchdown. Second time on the season he's been over 100 yards. He had 110 yards on 8 catches back in week 2. Any 2 of these 3, easy to play alongside Purdy and stacks. Mason, I happen to think, outside of some indirect correlation, functions a little bit better as a standalone running back than he does in stacks. He's easy to play in stacks if this team marches down the field but doesn't pass the ball into the end zone. The touchdown's going through him most of the time. But it's not the most appealing running back to stack up with a team. I think I'd rather have him on his own. RB 811 and 7.9 across sites. Kittle ranks as tight end 4 by scoring, but tight end 13 and 10 across sites by points per dollar. Even though I said it was an inoffensive price, I guess it doesn't necessarily rate out great. I'd still welcome George Kittle into as many lineups as I can get him. Ricky Pearsall, likely to be active for this one. That's with Juwan Jennings out. Pearsall should probably step into that role. They've also got Chris Conley, but Conley's been there. They haven't exactly involved him so far, so I can't really see going to him over a kid with first-round draft capital. Granted, it was a 31st overall pick, but it's still the first round. He's 6'1", 190 pounds. He got shot in the offseason. He's out of Florida. Dynamic player. Gained 965 yards and scored 4 times on 65 catches last year in Florida. In his last year in college, he added 2 rushing touchdowns, 3 carries for 62 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground. 5 touchdowns on just 33 catches, 661 yards the year before. Carried the ball 8 times for 113 yards and a score that year as well. So just another player who fits into exactly what San Francisco does. He can run, he can catch, he's dynamic, he can make big plays. He's got that ability. So just fits right in as like a, third or fourth facsimile of what Debo can do or what Christian McCaffrey can do in this lineup. Not by any means comparing him to those players outside of just the nature of his game. But he does do those things, and he's probably going to suit up at 3,400, 4,800. He's a dart. He ranks 53rd and 49th. We don't want to get too excited, 59th and 56th. And for whatever that's worth, I think he'll have popularity commensurate with those rankings, with that mid-board projection. People will want to play him. So, not my favorite depth option on the slate. Let's put it that way. Isaac Orendo just picks up the scraps behind Jordan Mason. Would be an interesting running back if Mason misses, but seems like Mason's not going to miss. Cowing, just a depth option, sub 1 projection. No real need to even talk about him. Played just 1 snap with the offense last week, 4 the week before, and otherwise a special teamer. In terms of the quarterback play, Purdy's completed 65% of 30 attempts per game for 271.5. Decent a bit of that comes after the catch, but this year 9.6 intended air yards per attempt is not nothing. 6 air yards per attempt per completion is not nothing, and 8.8 yards per pass attempt. Pretty significant. He's thrown 9 touchdowns against 4 interceptions. He's been good. He's a very effective quarterback up and down the field with excellent weapons to work with. So I do think he plays in stacks. Again, he rates out just kind of as a mid-board overall quarterback, but he's playable. So is Mahomes. Mahomes has thrown the ball 32 times a game. He's completed 6 touchdowns, but has also thrown 6 interceptions. Again, the touchdown scoring, the actual output for this Kansas City offense, a little bit shaky this year. Part of that's on Mahomes. Part of it's on the lack of connection with Kelsey early. Kelsey has not scored this season, pretty notably, but he's drawing 6.2 targets a game. It's only a matter of time. Worthy's drawn 4.2 targets a game. He's put up a 9.7 yard ADOT for 26.5% of the air yards. He's scored twice. He's also scored twice in the rushing game. Dynamic player. Does a lot of Debo type things in terms of his ability to run the ball, his ability to catch the ball and break big plays. Fastest player in football right now. Just needs more touches to really see true upside. We might get there, we might not. Depends on, does he become Tyreek Hill, or does he just become another guy who's just an average, okay kind of a player with some abilities, but never really comes through like a Elijah Moore? I think he's already probably better than Moore, but that kind of a guy. Biggest upside potential, biggest bonus potential. I got to give it to the guy averaging more than 100 yards a game in Jordan Mason. I think that's kind of straightforward and obvious. The most likely non-Mason guy, go Brandon Ayuk. Why not? Little curveball there. He's only done it once this season, but he got there several times last year. Debo's done it twice already. I like Ayuk. I'll go that route. A lot of playability in this game, but again, it's more on an individual basis. I think you can pick off some of the individual values. The Niners defense is standing out for one thing, against what has been a somewhat limited Kansas City team. I don't think it's completely crazy to consider them. But you get some individual skill players in here, particularly on the San Fran side. You've got a very obvious Travis Kelce standing tall over there. You've got Xavier Worthy, maybe a couple darts at Kareem Hunt, but I really don't love the upside on that. But the playability of the stacks is a little bit in question. Less so on this side. On that side, it's kind of ugly. Speaking of ugly, OK asks, can you fade Juju for Coker? I don't see. Yeah, I mean, it's easy to get away from Juju, if that's the nature of the question. I don't really see any significant attractor to Juju that would make it difficult to go away from him. So sure, if that's your thing, I don't see why not. Vegas is bad. The Rams have a couple good pieces. I wouldn't call them good, but at least these two guys are interesting. Let's check the status on Cooper Kupp. Kupp's obviously missed a bunch. Still questionable coming into this one. Was limited through practices, limited on Friday practice. No Saturday news. Friday quotes were, had a good week, and there's a possibility he'll play, per ESPN's reporting. I would still very much consider Kupp a question mark for this one, and it's a fairly significant question mark because of the potential volume. With Puka Nacua out all the way back in week 1, Kupp picked up, if memory serves as I'm sorting this, 21 targets. Yeah, 21 targets. He caught 14 of them for 110 yards and a touchdown. He exited week 2 after just 27 snaps. He had run 18 routes. He had been targeted 6 times. He caught 4 balls for 37 yards. Was clearly on his way to a fairly significant target game in that one as well. The game before, he had played 74 snaps to rack up that 21 targets. He had run 50 routes. So maybe not quite to the extreme level, but a mid-teens target total seemed pretty reachable in that game. I think once he's fully healthy, he comes right back to that kind of volume. He has been the go-to receiver for this team for a number of years. Puka Nacua's emergence last year notwithstanding in his outstanding rookie season, Kupp is still the go-to. It's just a question of what does the actual health look like. If he suits up at all, I think you go. Maybe we see a little bit of a downgrade in the projection based on the fact that he's still questionable. I'll consider that. I'm actually going to flag him for that. It is an aggressive projection based on the target opportunity and expectation. He ranks as WR4 across sites by points. He's wide receiver 9 by points per dollar on DraftKings, wide receiver 2 by points per dollar on FanDuel. You've got a significant volume running back in Kyren Williams. He's running back 1 on both sites by raw points, 3 by points per dollar on DraftKings, 2 by points per dollar on FanDuel. I say he's a significant volume guy because 19 carries a game. Also picking up 3 targets a game, so putting him at 22 potential touches per game. A lot of volume goes in his direction. The thing with Kyren Williams, and the thing that I'm a little bit worried about, is he's very dependent on that volume. The 19 carries a game are great, but he's only gained 3.8 yards per rush attempt this season. He's seeing 3 targets a game. He's catching nearly all of them, but he's only put up 4.7 yards per target, negative 1.1 yard ADOT. He's catching most of the balls behind the line of scrimmage. Obviously, the 7 touchdowns are fantastic. But if we need to carve out 15 targets for Cooper Kupp, some of those plays are going to come away from Kyren Williams. And the nature, the shape of this offense is going to be different than the offense that has fed this much volume to Kyren. So I do grow a little bit concerned about what does a lackluster yardage output look like against just 3 or 4 fewer touches. Not that this is a bad running back. But if you look back, glancing real quick at last year's game log, we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 games over 100 yards. But he needed at least 20 carries in all but one of those to get there. Week 12, 143 yards on 16 carries, added 61 yards on 6 catches and 2 touchdowns in the passing game. That was a monster performance. 200 plus yards from scrimmage and 2 TDs, but that came again on 22 overall touches. The volume's significant, but he needs it to get there. He really, really does. Now, most of those opportunities, those games with 20 plus rush attempts into the 25 range, those came with Cooper Kupp and in some cases both Kupp and Nakua on the field. So it's not an automatic that the carries are going to go away. It's not even necessarily likely. But the possibility exists. The possibility exists that taking him from 19 carries to 17 and a half, from 3 targets to 1 and change, does have a further limiting impact. So he needs the volume, needs the touchdowns to succeed. Otherwise, it's just kind of okay. Demarcus Robinson, really only valuable if Kupp's not out there. 15.9 yard ADOT is solid. 4.6 targets a game is fine, but only 1 touchdown on the season. Kobe Parkinson, the tight end, draws 6.4 targets a game on limited depth. The targets are good. That's another player who might, slip to drop down from 6.4 to 4.4 targets and have 2 of those plays go in Cooper Kupp's direction. Could definitely see that happen. He's failed to score so far this season. It's been a limited passing attack so far. Matthew Stafford, just 3 touchdown passes this year against 3 interceptions. 7 yards per pass attempt on 6.8 intended air yards per attempt. He's thrown for nearly 250 yards a game because he's throwing the ball 35 times, but we are not talking about an effective pass attack in the absence of their top 2 receivers. Blake Corum, really not much to discuss with him, just 2.6 carries a game behind the volume monster. No upside unless he gets a new opportunity with reshaped by Kyron's being out or something. Right now, behind Kyron, really not that much appeal. Would need to break one, and even then you're just talking about a bad dart throw. Jordan Whittington coming into this one questionable. He's been the nominal number 2 wide receiver right now. 4.6 targets a game. Hasn't scored. Had a touchdown called back all the way back in, I want to say week 1, might have been week 2. I think that was on a rushing attempt. But he's been drawing regular targeting lately. 8 targets, 6 catches for 62 yards in week 4. Before the bye week, in week 5, he had 7 catches on 10 targets for 89 yards. So we're seeing a little bit of an uptick and does have a bit of a skill set. So ranks out as their next most playable receiver and would move up the board somewhat if Cooper Kupp doesn't play. Tyler Johnson, just limited opportunities, 3 targets a game so far. Another guy who slips down the board and would be basically vaporize if Kupp's out there. He played just 11 snaps with the offense in the week before the bye, drew 6 targets, caught none of them. Also went 0 for 4 the week before that. So he's 0 for his last 10 targets, which isn't good when you're only playing 10 and 11 snaps per game. Not inspiring a ton of faith from the coaching staff. Tutu Atwell I skipped over. He's drawn 5 targets a game. Another playable-ish kind of option. If you see a rising tide effect happening for the Rams against a pretty bad Vegas defense, you can include Tutu Atwell in that conversation. The Raiders have given up more yardage in the rushing attack, which is part of the appeal for Kyron Williams, assuming the volume. The yardage is right there for him. 5 yards allowed per rush attempt, ranks 27th. They've given up 6.9 yards per pass attempt. That's middle of the league at 15th. Just 14 sacks and 2 picks on the year. Nothing significant as far as a threat from the defense. It's just, what does the actual Rams attack look like here? They're pulling a 25.25 point implied team total. They're favored by 7 in this one. I can see them easily getting up a touchdown, getting up 2 scores, and just kind of coasting on Kyron Williams shares. The Rams may not have to throw the ball all that much to get out ahead of this team. So a little bit concerning there. Aiden O'Connell at the helm for the Raiders. No Devontae anymore. Right now, no Jacoby Myers. He was downgraded to doubtful during the week. Seems like he's not going to play again. So you're dealing with another week of Brock Bowers as by far the most appealing piece from this offense. You've got probably a split situation if Zamir White makes it back. He's expected to play. Him and Alexander Madison just kind of cannibalize one another's opportunities. I think Madison is the better player between the two. He's provided a little bit more upside. He would be interesting if White wasn't playing, but if White's out there, it's just a split scenario where both guys rank in the mid-20s. I don't really need either guy if that's where you're going to come in. For the season, Madison just 3.4 yards per rush attempt versus the 3.1 that Zamir's put up, but Madison has at least managed to score 3 times in the rushing game. He's added a receiving touchdown to that on 3 targets a game. He is the more interesting player. It's just neither one of them is really all that good. Bowers has been a significant target. He's got 1 receiving touchdown. He's just a 5.9 yard average depth of target, but putting up 8.3 yards per target, 7.7 targets a game, and picked up 10 targets in his most recent outing. Has definitely been the beneficiary of a pretty big volume of free targets available in this passing attack. Last week, 9 catches for 71 yards on his 10 targets. The week before that, he had 8 catches on 12 targets, 97 yards, and scored his first NFL touchdown. Kid is a top-end receiving tight end. He was drafted, I believe, 12th overall. Early first-round pick, put it that way. So a lot of draft capital involved in the talent, a lot of talent involved in the player. It's just the guy delivering the ball isn't exactly ideal. Aiden O'Connell, nobody's idea of a game-breaking quarterback. Oh, that's funny. I assure you, Aiden O'Connell's not throwing the ball 72 times a game. That's dividing against the wrong column for him. It's probably dividing against his appearances, not his starts. O'Connell threw the ball 40 times last week. That was his season high. 27 of 40 completed, 227 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. Just 23 snaps the week before, completed 10 of 20, 13 snaps in week 3, completed 9 of 12, threw a touchdown that week. Has 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions in his limited action, 560 yards per 5 points. I can't believe the one that's on here correct. I said wrong. 5.6 yards per pass attempt. He's not throwing for 403 yards per game. Tucker in his limited work, 4.5 targets a game, is the next man up in that passing attack. He played 57 snaps last week, 55 the week before, ran 36 and 37 routes, caught 2 balls for 18 yards in week 5, no catches on 2 targets last time out. In week 4, he had 5 catches for 41. He was actually better in week 3, 7 catches for 96 and a touchdown on 9 targets. All of those were season highs. That was his lone touchdown of the season. He's getting down the field a little bit, a 10.5 yard average depth of target, 20.7% of the air yards. But this is not a good offense. This is not a good receiving group. DJ Turner, a 15.3 yard ADOT, 0 touchdowns on the season for Turner. He had 2 catches for 37 yards last week on 31 routes run. Been targeted 4 times in each of the last 2 games. I think we expect similar volume and similarly lackluster performances. Christian Wilkerson was on the active roster last week, might be activated again. He went back down to the practice squad midweek, but with Myers probably missing, he probably pops back up. He was targeted 3 times on 16 routes over 26 snaps last week, caught 2 balls for 18 yards and did score a touchdown. So if he's back out on the field, given the idea of everybody being a pretty limited involvement, pretty limited talent receiver outside of Bowers, sure, if you're throwing a lot of darts around AOC stacks, go for it. That said, those stacks are going to be bad. Those players are going to be bad. And this receiver ranks in the 60s. So not a lot of opportunity here. Mir Abdullah limited by opportunity. Same thing with Bryant. Tyreek McAllister maybe sees a look or 2, but doesn't rate well and doesn't exactly project for much. McAllister, 4 snaps with the offense back in week 4. Those are the only 4 snaps he's played with the offense. He carried the ball twice, gained 11 yards, ran 1 route, went untargeted. That's about it. Overall, this is not really an appealing game. I do think that the Kyren chalk makes a ton of sense. He rates out great against a leaky rush defense that, again, is allowing 5 yards per rush attempt. But a lot of Kyren's output revolves entirely around those touches. If a couple of those touches go away, it has a impactful effect on his potential rushing totals, on his touchdown scoring ability. He is still a premium running back on this slate, no doubt about it. He projects over 20 fantasy points. He projects like a quarterback. He ranks as the top running back option on both sides by points, 3 and 2 by points per dollar. But I am concerned about the spot, especially if he's going to get as popular as it looks like it's going to. If he plays, Cooper Kupp is the most likely bonus guy. If Cooper Kupp doesn't play, I'm going to say burn the Kyron people, and we're going to Brock Bowers as our bonus guy. Why not? Doesn't matter for anything anyway. I really do like Bowers as a target. Tight end 3 on both sides by points, 5 on both sides by value. Easily the most playable piece from the Vegas side. Vegas seems unlikely to hold up their end of this game. Maybe Bowers does a little bit, but that, on top of everything, limits the expectation for any kind of output in the Rams passing attack and just feeds the idea of Kyron drawing his opportunities anyway if they're just burning clock time. So it is a favorable game script for the chalky running back. Oh, another lousy one. Barkley and Neighbors, strong plays for WW Fresh. Love the Saquon look. Neighbors, yeah. Nabers, by the way. Threw me there for a second. I was like, who the hell is Neighbors? Because there's a hockey player named Neighbors spelled that way. Then I was like, wait, who am I forgetting? Crossing up my wires there on me. But yeah, that's the obvious man for man pairing as far as the top 2 potential scorers in that game. I love the idea of Saquon and his ridiculous potential, his ridiculous output overall. Outside of when he was a top target for me last week, I love going right back to the well with Saquon against a bad Giants defense. Not because of a revenge narrative, though that is there. But I just love the idea of 20 potential touches against a leaky Giants defense for such a dynamic player. And then, Neighbors is probably going to pop back into 12 to 15 targets as the lead option for the Giants' entire offense, let alone their passing game. Oh, yeah. WW, I'm not judging you by your spelling. I was just explaining what tripped my brain up there with that spelling specifically. Danny Dimes, Neighbors, and AJ for Greg Biancone as a bring back. That's not bad. I have no love for Danny Jones, but Neighbors can carry him to some production in that combination. They'll be low owned. He projects out okay. Limited rushing out of Danny Jones this year, and really the quarterback play hasn't been great. Neighbors has been making some really, really exceptional catches in his active games to make the upside for Danny Jones look better. Like I said earlier in the show, like 26 of the 31 other quarterbacks in the league, Neighbors probably would have been off to an even better start to his career. So there is that, but yeah, I do think that's playable. Anthony Richardson coming back to start this week. I almost want to say I'm sure. It seemed like that was the case last week, and then it changed late in the game, and when they went with Joe Flacco. But they announced on Friday that Richardson was taking the start. All systems seem like a go here. He comes back in at almost, the good news, he comes back in at almost an identical projection to where we were finding Joe Flacco. They do extremely different things on the field, but they're priced similarly and they project similarly. So they're kind of interchangeable parts. I believe they're the exact same price on FanDuel. I forget how the pricing stacks up on DraftKings. Richardson lands as $13.12 on DK, $14.13 on FanDuel. He's a playable mid-board QB with pretty significant scoring potential. He's a good runner with the ball in his hands, although they might limit that with him coming off of the injury report. If you saw that game where he got hurt, came out of the game for a play, went back in, and they immediately called a run that led him directly to run into a defender and get hurt again. So maybe that they learned from that, but it is a big part of his game, both scrambling and design runs. So I wouldn't take it away from him, but maybe there's a consideration as far as the designed plays get a little bit limited in the first few games back. As a passer, we're completing fewer than 10 pass attempts per game. 9.8 on 19.25. This is not significant volume. This is the ugliest volume in the league so far this year. Just 51% of those pass attempts have been completed. But man, the nature of those completions, the nature of these 3 touchdown passes, he creates significant scoring events when he manages to connect with guys down the field like an Alec Pierce at low ownership, like an Adonai Mitchell at low ownership. Pittman and Downs are the top 2 receivers in this offense, and Downs has been shining lately playing with Flacco. We'll see what playing with Richardson looks like. But there is tremendous DFS scoring potential locked up in this 12.7 intended air yards per attempt. The 8.5 yards per pass attempt is good. 5.5 air yards per attempt is great. But he's thrown 6 interceptions against the 3 touchdowns. He takes shots, no doubt about it, down the field. Pittman, a 9.6 yard average depth of target for 22.8% of the air yards, some of that with Flacco. 15.3 yard ADOT for Adonai for 20.15% of the air yards, and then an absurd 25.8 yard average depth of target on 3.5 targets a game for Alec Pierce. That gives Pierce, on just 3.5 targets a game, 30% of the team's air yards. He scored 3 touchdowns. He's been over 100 yards a couple times on just a couple of big catches. I wrote about him last week. I talked about him last week, and he went out there and got shut out because Joe Flacco missed him. If you watch that game, Alec Pierce beat his man by, I'm going to call it 135 yards. It's probably more like, half a step, but he was way out ahead of his man, and Flacco overthrew him by like 10 yards. Just completely missed him on what would have been a big touchdown pass. Frustrating for the Alec Pierce fans in the clubhouse, but Pierce is definitely a guy with big playability. You can see he's putting up 61.3 yards per game on just 2.2 catches. A 17.5 yards per target share on his 3.5 targets per game. And he scored 3 times. Really like the option. And if he gets his guy back here, Richardson's the guy who delivered with him early in the season. In week 1, they connected 3 times for 125 yards and a touchdown. Week 2, he had 5 catches for 56 yards and a touchdown. And then he waited until week 5 to really do anything interesting. 3 catches, 134 yards, and a touchdown that week. So he's been over 100 yards pretty significantly twice on just 3 catches. And he's got 3 touchdown grabs. Again, went 0 for despite taking 58 snaps and running 29 routes. Targeted 4 times on bad passes by Flacco last week. Pittman, 7 targets a game. Downs, 8.8 targets a game. Downs missed weeks 1 and 2. Came back to a little bit limited volume with just 24 routes run in week 3, but then popped back up to his normal expectations, 36 and 34 routes run in weeks 4 and 5, and then up to 42 routes last week. Caught 7 passes from Flacco for 66 yards and a TD last week. Had another touchdown in a pretty productive week 4, 8 catches, 82 yards and a TD on 9 targets that week. And then had 9 grabs for 69 yards in week 5 on 12 targets, a season high. Definitely involved. He was the clear number 2 receiver on this team last year and is kind of back in that role, operating as the underneath man, just a 5.5 yard ADOT for his significant targeting. Not a downfield guy, but a guy who's going to be a big piece of the offense as Richardson needs to throw some shorter passes as they march down the field. Downs was limited through practices this week. He's dealing with a toe issue still, but it seems like he's full go. They're limiting his workload in practices so that he's ready for game day Sundays. Let me double check that. We are dealing with, for one, I buried the lead. Taylor's out again. I think we knew that, though. Trey Sermon, Tyler Goodson in the running back core. But all 3 of Pittman, Downs, and Pierce are technically questionable for this one. I do expect all 3 of them to be out there. Pittman's last report didn't practice on Friday, but reporting states that he is likely to play, barring something weird, with a quote from the coach saying, yeah, he'll be out there. So that seems pretty definitive. Downs, no assurances as the way this is written for Downs in that same conversation. They said Pittman will be out there, but they did not confirm the status for Downs. That becomes a little bit more concerning, but quite honestly, despite his talent and involvement in the passing game, when Richardson's on the field, I kind of want the Pierces of the world. I kind of want the downfield guys. Pierce, full practice on Friday. He's dealing with his shoulder. Seems totally likely to play. And again, just needs a couple of downfield looks. And a shoulder injury won't really impact his ability to burn somebody down the field. Maybe it impacts his ability to stretch his arm like that and make the catch. But a lot of times the ball's not going to be anywhere near him with with Richardson throwing it anyway. Power diving in, Ramondre is expected to play in what is an ugly, ugly London game in the morning that kills Antonio Gibson's upside for your season long and showdowns for Sunday. Yeah, will concur. Haven't looked at that game at all. Don't want to look at that game. Greatly prefer the Jacksonville side. No love at all for New England's offense, but maybe they're a little bit more capable with May at the helm. We'll project that one, but we won't be talking about that one. Check out the site tomorrow morning for full projections for that game, or maybe I'll get them done tonight. It's not all that difficult. Miami and Indy. So Miami's defense has been relatively capable against the pass, just allowing 6.7 yards per pass attempt. That ranks 11th in the league. They've only given up 3 passing touchdowns on the season. It's pretty stout in terms of the scoring that they've allowed. But the nature of this passing attack, just the big play upside, still stands. Even against that strong of a defense, it could lead to some interceptions thrown by Richardson, for sure. There is a little bit of scoring potential in the Miami defense, I would suspect. They rank 5th and 7th by points and 4th and 2nd by points per dollar on across sites, 2,800, 3,600 against a mistake-prone quarterback, a banged-up receiver core, and backup running backs. Miami defense on the board. They've given up 4.7 yards per rush attempt. That's 23rd in the league. But they've gained a 22.5% pressure rate, just 9 sacks and 3 interceptions on the season. Not the highest scoring defense in DFS. But again, with the idea that Richardson might throw a couple away, I could see it. On Miami's side, we're unfortunately just dealing with Tyler Huntley at the quarterback position. I'm not even comfortable with that mid-board projection for Huntley. 5,100, 6,700 across sites. QB 16, 18 by points, but QB 9 by points per dollar is why I maybe want to press that down slightly. I'd rather have him in double digits so he doesn't actually look good as people look at these quarterback rankings. I'm actually going to flag him just in case. I don't know that I go change that, but I might put my finger on the scale a little bit. Huntley's thrown the ball just 26.5 times a game for 145 yards. He's thrown an interception and no touchdown in his limited performances so far. Basically amounts to 2 games. $14 of 22 in week 4 for 96 yards, no touchdown. Didn't throw a pick, though. Ran the ball 8 times for 40 yards and did score in the rushing attack. He does have that skill set. But when you're only limited as far as your ability to throw the ball and none of your skill players are doing all that much around you, they're not going to really let you break big runs from the quarterback position. He completed 18 of 31 for 194 yards, 58.1% of his passes, threw an interception and no touchdown against New England in week 5. Carried the ball just 3 times in that game for 7 yards, pretty limited as far as the rushing attack goes. They've got Devon Achane. They've got Raheem Mostert. Achane is dealing with a concussion, but he practiced all through the week, full practice on Friday. Looks like he's trending toward playing. Obviously, some explosive upside there. Mostert came back from for week 5. He ran the ball 19 times for 80 yards, caught 2 passes for 18 to put him over, 98 yards from scrimmage, I'm sorry. But 21 touches in that game. Significant output. I would go to Mostert if Achane doesn't play. I prefer Achane if he is out there to Mostert, but we know there's slate breaking ability for both running backs. Neither guy has really gotten there at all this season. Achane just 3 carries on 11 snaps in week 5. Carried the ball 10 times over 39 snaps, but managed to gain just 15 yards in the rushing game. Picked up 3 catches on 3 targets for another 14 yards, so 29 yards from scrimmage on 13 touches in week 4. That's not the explosive player that we were dealing with last year. 11 carries for 30 yards in week 3. Had 22 carries in his biggest game back in week 2. That was for 96 yards against a bad Buffalo rush defense. He also caught 7 of 7 targets in that game for 69 yards and a touchdown. That was with Mostert out, but so were the week 3 and 4 performances that were pretty bad. So it's been really rough with these 2 players outside of Achane's week 2 performance. Really limited output. He did catch 7 more passes in week 1 for 76 yards on 7 targets. So that was heavy involvement there, and he did get over 100 yards from scrimmage, but drew just 10 carries in week 1. That was playing with Tua as well. The output in the passing game has been diminished recently. He caught 3 balls in week 4. He caught 1 in the limited action in week 5. There's a downstream impact from having Huntley at quarterback, and it'll be the same when Skylar Thompson comes back. That's been a limiting factor for Tyreek Hill so far this season. I'm still a believer in Hill. I'm a big believer in any player with the ability to just break a monster play regardless of where you put the ball in his hands. Tyreek Hill's kind of like the old, remember the, what was it? John Elway's quarterback for Nintendo? Going back to the 80s? For three of you out there. There was that glitch player in that game where you could get the ball and, I'm talking about pixels. I'm not talking about like, players who have names or anything in video game format. But you can catch the ball with that guy, and you can spend the rest of the game running up and down the field but not going into the end zone and just burn the clock out because he was programmed for some reason like 10 times faster than everybody else in the game. You can get that kind of upside from Tyreek Hill from time to time. He's ridiculous. But he hasn't really done it much this season. 130 yards and a touchdown in week 1 playing with Tua. Caught 7 of 12 balls that week. Hasn't been over 70 yards. Hasn't scored in any of the 5 games since. Peaked at 69 yards on 6 of 10 receiving in week 5 against New England. At least it's trending in the right direction. But he's been limited by the quarterback play. Even worse, Waddle's been even more limited by quarterback play. Waddle caught 5 of 5 for 109 yards in week 1. 4 of 4 for 41 in week 2. And has consistently caught exactly 4 passes for less than 50 yards in each successive week. Waddle has not scored a touchdown this season. It's a very good receiver, hampered by very poor quarterback play. By the numbers, still drawing 5.6 targets a game, returning 9.2 yards per target, catching 4.2 of them on an 8.3 yard ADOT for 20 and change % of the air yards. He's an involved, significant receiver, just not getting the job done. Neither is Tyreek Hill, but both players do have game-breaking ability. It's just, the opportunities to break that game become more limited. So you're looking at just, 1 instead of 2 big plays out of each guy. Odell Beckham likely to be active. He was targeted once in his limited action. He played 9 snaps, ran 9 routes, picked up 1 target, and did not catch it in his week 5 debut. Presumably a little bit more opportunity to play with another week of healing after the bye week, but extremely limited. It's been quite a while since Odell Beckham was any kind of a relevant player on a football field. Jonnu, just a limited mid-board option. 4.2 targets a game, but hasn't gotten in the end zone. 6.7 yards per target this season on a 5.8 yard ADOT. He does have, any given slate touchdown scoring potential, but he's only been targeted in the red zone once this season. That came in his 7 target week. He caught 6 of those for 53 yards, but didn't convert the red zone opportunity. Since then, his biggest week also came in week 5 against New England. 5 catches for 62 on 8 targets in that one. Was extremely limited in every other game. It's a little bit of scoring potential around Jonnu, less so around Odell. And then downboard, Jalen Wright has been good in his limited opportunities, carrying the ball 7.3 times per game, gaining 34.8 yards per game on 4.8 yards per rush attempt. Those numbers exceed both A-Chain at 3.3 and Mostert at 3.6 yards per rush attempt on significantly higher volume this season. Might be a good idea to give the young running back some opportunities, but he's really only going to benefit if one of those guys misses time, and it looks like they're both going to be active here. There is no downboard appeal for any of these guys, the Malik Washingtons, Braxton Berrioses of the world. They would need something to happen up here, and even then, they are so limited talent-wise with limited opportunities from the quarterback that it's just not worth discussing. Miami grades out as stack 14-12 on DK, 17-17 on FanDuel. Technically a little bit higher than Indy, just on the back of a few talented skill players that need to get their projection. But in a real game with a real quarterback, this would be a much bigger projection, much bigger opportunity for Miami. Right now, they just kind of look meh. I do think you can mine this game a little bit for skill players like Tyreek Hill, like one of the running backs, maybe a little bit of Waddle. And definitely I like some of the potential for big playability around like a Pierce or a Pittman, even a Downs. But overall, this game is lackluster. 3-point spread and a 43-point total. A little opportunity around the defense there in single digits. Basically everything else, at least into the double digits. Colts defense may be providing a little bit of scoring potential against a bad quarterback, kind of for the same reasons. A little bit of interception upside. But they've been bad in terms of yardage allowed. They've gained a 19% pressure rate, and they've sacked the quarterback just 12 times on the season while allowing significant yardage per play. You'd like to think that Huntley could find the upside day, but on such a deep slate, do we really want to get bogged down with Miami shares when there's so many more appealing options on the board? I think they're better just for a couple of skill players here and there. Tyreek Hill, number 1. Alec Pierce, number 2, as far as my 100-yard guys. I think Pierce gets there on just 2 catches. The realistic answer from the Indy side is probably Michael Pittman, but I want to give it to Pierce. And it's my show. Speaking of, check out rotoscouts.com as we transition over to the Jets and Pittsburgh game that is only on the FanDuel slate. We'll take a brief intermission to point out the site again. Every single plan, every single data point, all of these numbers, access to every projection, every ranking, every piece of content, the ridiculous 20,000 words that I wrote about this slate in the Optimizer Groups article, all of those pieces plus NHL projections today, NBA projections starting up on Tuesday, the balance of the MLB season, whatever else comes, you get access to all of it on the same plan. One price, one plan. The only choice is weekly, monthly, or quarterly. How do you want to pay for it? Every single one of those options, under $1 a day. If you take a bigger bite in a quarterly plan, that's 3 months for those not familiar. It's a slightly lower per day price. But every plan is under $1 a day because I want you guys to use your money wisely. I want you guys to build your bankrolls. I don't want to be here biting away from your bankrolls like some of these other sites. Just a little bit to keep the lights on here. A little bit to pay the hosting fees. It's all we need. There's no reason that people building 1 to 20, even 150 lineups should be paying hundreds and hundreds of dollars. If you're building 500 lineups and entering $12,000 worth of lineups every week, sure, go pay $500 per sport for an optimizer and a sim tool with great projections. I'm not taking away from those products. Those are great products. But there is a very, very large chunk of people out there that are just looking for more straightforward stuff. They're just looking for projections. Tell me how these guys fit into the slate with some rankings. If you can put some percentages on it via a great tool like our guys over at AceMind, so much the better. And those guys, also the most affordable tool in the industry. Put those two things together, you gain a lot of power for a very low price. Points per dollar upside here at RotoScouts. So check out rotoscouts.com. Also, check out acemind.io. Promo code RotoScouts gets you 20% off your first month with those guys. Jets, Steelers. Is it interesting? I don't know. It's only on the FanDuel slate. So, DK gamers, you guys can take a quick break. There are rankings populated here, but as you'll see, they're all the same depending on the positions because they're all just zeroed out. That just threw me for a half a second there. I was like, wait, is this game on DraftKings? What happened? The Jets defense ranks first at the defensive position by points, by raw points, and 5th overall by points per dollar. I think the Jets defense is kind of interesting as a late night hammer of a value defense. It's not a bad option for 4,800 with their upside, with their pretty reasonable ability. They rank 9th with 4.3 yards allowed per rush attempt. They rank 4th with 6.2 yards allowed per pass attempt. They've generated a 28.9% pressure rate, and they've sacked the quarterback 20 times. Believe they were the second highest sack rate behind the Giants. Both New York teams, pretty significant pass rushers. Neither New York team has picked off a lot of passes. The Jets have 2. I believe the Giants have 1. But the Jets have a better defensive secondary overall. But these are interesting numbers for a team that ranks out very well. They're going to be dealing with an unknown in Russell Wilson. First time we've seen Russ this season. Russ was a little bit more effective, I think, than people might want to give him credit for last year. The yardage wasn't great. The per game output wasn't great. He only threw for a little bit over 3,000 yards. A little bit over 3,000 yards last year. He had 3,500 yards the year before, but that was actually the weaker of the two seasons. In that first season in Denver, just 16 touchdown passes against 11 interceptions on the 292 completions, 483 attempts, 60.5% completion rate. He bounced back up to right around his career average, 66.4% completions in 2023. And despite losing nearly 500 yards of passing output overall on the 297 balls that he completed in 15 games that year, he had a 26-8 touchdown to interception ratio. That's not insignificant, especially with the limited overall nature of that Denver passing game last year. At 34, yeah, the yardage wasn't great. Russ's best season, he topped out around 4,200 yards. So 1,000, 1,200 fewer yards on roughly 75 fewer completions. But 26 touchdown passes. That's down from his career high of 40 that came in 2020. He threw 35 in 2018. He threw 34 back in 2017. He's a different player. But is the ability to throw touchdown passes completely abandoned Russell Wilson with a couple capable receivers like George Pickens and Pat Freiermuth on his side? I don't think so. I'm at least curious to find out. It's not going to lead me to many Russ stacks at 6,400. But as QB5 by points per dollar, it might lead me to a few. George Pickens ranks wide receiver 7 on FanDuel by points per dollar. Patty Freiermuth, tight end 9 by points per dollar. As a 3-man combo, for as cheap as those guys are, as a late night option on FanDuel, much as I just talked up the Jets defense, you got to at least consider that. As a contrarian option in that 10,000 entry Milly, you got to at least give it some thought. Does it win? Does it get there all that frequently? I don't think so. But I know for sure it's not going to be that popular. I think more popularity lands on the Jets side of this one, but even they weren't rating out like crazy outside of Breece Hall. Hall ranks 9th by points and 7th by points per dollar on FanDuel at the running back position. He's a strong option, but he's going to be running headlong into a defense that's allowed just 3.6 yards per rush attempt this season. Pittsburgh's been a lot more vulnerable to the pass with 7.1 yards allowed per attempt. That ranks 18th. They've gained just 20% pressure on the quarterback. They've been good as a scoring defense, though. Just 14.3 points allowed per game. That ranks 2nd overall. 1.5 touchdowns with just 0.3 touchdowns coming in the rushing attack. So that's 1.2 passing touchdowns against, 0.3 rushing touchdowns against per game. So Breece may be a little bit more limited than people might expect. He's not pulling a 20-point projection. Not in my model anyway. I think he's more highly projected on other sites. I kind of question the actual ceiling for Breece Hall in this one. I would still consider him. I still think he's a very talented player. And he got on the board for a bit of volume last time out. Finally had his big game, 113 yards on 18 carries, picked up another 56 on 5 of 6 receiving. Prior to that, he had topped out with 62 rush yards on 14 carries and another 52 yards with a touchdown on 7 catches all the way back in week 2. This is a significant player for this team. But the spike in output was nice to see. That came with a lot of coach speak with the coaching change around the idea, hey, we're going to feed the running back position the ball. We're going back to a rush-focused team. And they did. That was a season high, 18 carries for Breece last time out. But immediately after that game, they went out and traded for Davante Adams. And Aaron Rodgers is clearly making the decisions for this team. So like I was saying earlier in the show, I definitely think that speaks to this team trying to pass the ball at a pretty significant clip in this contest. Feeds the upside for a Rodgers stack. Rodgers plus Adams and Wilson. Rodgers plus Adams and Lazard is viable. Wilson and Lazard is lower owned, but significantly viable in this game. There are a lot of ways to stack the Jets that don't necessarily include Breece Hall. And I think they're interesting for low ownership for those reasons. This is not, despite a 38-point total, just a 1.5-point spread for one thing to push the potential for a competitive game. With Russ taking the helm in Pittsburgh, with the renewed Packers version of the Jets offense. I think it's a little bit underappreciated as a late night option. Wilson saw a tremendous spike in output over the last 2 weeks. It'll be really interesting to see what impact Adams has on him. He was targeted 23 times, caught 13 balls for 101 yards and a touchdown in week 5, caught another 8 passes on 10 targets for 107 yards and a touchdown in week 6. Prior to that, he hadn't been over 60 yards all season, hadn't been over 6 catches, hadn't been over 11 targets. So a big spike in output, but there's going to be an impact for sure from Davante. The other thing that this team has been doing is targeting Allen Lazard very significantly in the red zone. Lazard has 5 receiving touchdowns already this season. I said in week 1 that I like the idea of Lazard scoring some touchdowns this year and the renewed, connection with those two players who are very familiar with one another. And Rodgers is the reason that Lazard's on this team, just like Rodgers is the reason that Davante's here. But I didn't expect him to have 5 touchdowns by week 6. He had 2 week 1, had 1 in week 3, and 1 in each of weeks 5 and 6, and he spiked a big upside game. 6 catches for 114 yards on 7 targets with the touchdown in week 6 against Buffalo. Lazard's been very involved, and if everything else goes away, I still like him to be a red zone target for this offense. So I definitely think some of the opportunities as far as catching passes up and down the field go away, but Lazard going to be under-owned for the touchdown scoring potential that he still has. 6.7 targets a game, 5 touchdowns, 11.2 targets a game going to Wilson, but again, some of those will trend toward Davante. Davante was pulling 9 targets a game. He caught 6 of them in his limited action with Vegas before he decided he didn't want to play there anymore. Sat out weeks 4 through 6 with a fake injury. In week 2, he had 110 yards and a touchdown on 9 of 12 receiving. That was his big game for the season. He's back at full health. He was already hanging out in Aaron Rodgers' apartment, at least for the Pat McAfee show reveal that they did. So presumably this was in the works. Davante's fine. I like him to be the lead target option. I like his touchdown upside. The fact that he's not overly highly owned and competitive with the premium receivers as far as talent and everything goes for just 6,900 definitely puts him in play on this slate. Tyler Conklin drawing 5 targets a game, but has failed to score so far this season. Probably sees a little bit of a drawdown in his targeting as well as just, kind of the 4th banana in this passing attack. And then it gets really thin around the Gibsons and so on of the world. If Conklin doesn't play, that spells upside for Ruckert, but I believe that Conklin got off the injury report later in the week. Yeah, no injury tag for Conklin. So should be full go for him. A touchdown dependent tight end as far as his true ceiling goes for DFS output. Peaked at 5 catches for 93 yards on 6 targets back in week 3 against New England. Did have involvement in the passing game for touchdowns last year. As far as Russ and his team goes, he's got Pickens to work with. Pickens has carried a 12.2 yard ADOT, but he's failed to score so far. 7.3 targets a game on that average depth of target, though, puts him as one of the leading receivers in terms of air yard share. 46.3% of his team's air yards. That puts him competitive with McLaurin and whoever the other guy was. Patty Freiermuth drawing 4.3 targets a game. He's scored twice already this season. Just a 5-yard average depth of target, but that still garnered him 11% of the air yards in what has been a limited passing attack behind Justin Fields. A 12.4 and a 12.6 yard average depth of target going to Calvin Austin and Van Jefferson further down the depth chart, down in this territory. That's on 2.8 and 2.2 targets a game, but it's amounted to 17 and 13% of the team's air yards. Austin's gotten in the end zone. These are very limited options, but one of them, and it's probably Austin, could see a little bit of success on just, improved nature of the targets, if not necessarily enhanced opportunities. Better thrown balls is what I'm saying. Darnell Washington has a touchdown, but it came on just 1.2 targets a game. Washington is an interesting option to keep in mind for showdown versions of this game. I don't think he's on the board for much upside as a full slate play. Jets definitely rank out in most respects ahead of the Steelers, but I don't think the Steelers are off the board. I'm kind of intrigued by those cheap prices for a Russ Pickens Freiermuth 3-man. Not out of the realm of possibility that could succeed, and that would be a path to your Jefferson Amon-Ra pairing, while also getting at least 1 or 2 of those premium running backs that we've talked about. So there is upside in considering some value stacking here. It's the same, but not to quite the same extent for the Jets. They're stacked 12 by points, but stack 8 by points per dollar. And you do have 9.7 rating on Breece Hall, 13.8 on Rodgers. Adams at 16.14, highly playable for value, and it continues on down the board there. It's going to be an interesting showdown game as well. Showdown-wise, I have to think that Allen Lazard is going to slip as far as his ownership in comparison to Adams, Wilson, and Breece Hall. Makes Lazard super, super interesting for showdown touchdown scoring upside. Same could be said about Conklin with a little bit less expectation of volume. Same limitation on Hall potentially by the defense. Still love Adams and Wilson for just targeting and being very, very good. And then showdown-wise, both quarterbacks would be on the board. I didn't talk about the Pittsburgh rushing attack. I forgot. Najee ranks out okay. 15th by points, 12th by points per dollar on FanDuel. He's gained just 3.9 yards per rush attempt on 16 carries a game. He's been in the end zone just once, but Jalen Warren hasn't been any better. 3.1 yards per rush attempt on 5 carries a game for Warren. So both running backs have been limited. Our trolls last week didn't like the Najee call, or maybe that was the week before. Najee went out last week and gained 106 yards and scored a touchdown on his 14 carries. Caught 2 balls for 16 yards. The week before, he had 77 yards from scrimmage on just 16 touches, which is, not good, but not nothing. Fairly touchdown dependent, but still does have a bit of upside. It's mostly volume driven, though. The explosiveness hasn't really been there this year. Limited options in both running back spots for Pittsburgh, but both guys are playable in that showdown format and would probably be lower owned than anybody else. That's about it for this game. I'll throw a curveball and say that Garrett Wilson's our most likely bonus guy. I think Devontae, as much as they want to reestablish the connection and get their new toy out of the box as quickly as possible, you could see the idea that it maybe still does just amount to 4 or 5 targets, with Wilson leading the way for targets and marching his way down the field. If Devontae's drawing the coverage away from Wilson, that's going to play as a very dynamic 1-2. And then again, I just love the upside for the sneaky touchdowns for Lazard. Let's get off this FanDuel only game. Welcome back, DraftKings folks. We got 3 games to go. Making decent time, 6:46, 2 hours and change into the show, but still well ahead of the ALCS pace. What do you think of Big Daddy Hopkins for the sneak, huh? I don't love that Tennessee passing game, but apparently it's going to be Rudolph instead of Levis. Rudolph threw 17 passes back in week 4. Completed just 52.9% of them. 9 for 85 yards. Didn't score. He peaked in his 2019 season with 10 games played. 1,765 yards that year with Pittsburgh. 13 touchdowns against 9 interceptions. He hasn't thrown more than 75 passes in a season in the 3 years since then. A couple of randomly effective spot starts here and there. In week 16 last year, 290 yards and 2 touchdowns on 17 of 27 passing. Week 17, 274 pretty empty yards. Didn't play at all in 2022. And then just a couple of games in 2021. 30 of 50 in week 10 of that year for 242 yards, a touchdown, and an interception against Detroit. Now 29 years old. The career has kind of come and gone on Mason Rudolph. But he does have, again, there are name brand options, and you mentioned one of them with Hopkins. And the other one is Ridley. I don't know that he necessarily enhances their potential any more than it was looking like with Levis. And with Levis, I really didn't like it. Once again, skipping ahead to this last game. But yeah, Ridley, 28-26 on DK, 32-22 on FanDuel. Hopkins, 34-29, 37-32. Those are not unplayable levels. Again, we are putting 3 to 4 wide receivers in our lineups, and both those guys come fairly cheap. So top 30 points per dollar rankings on both sites has its appeal. Just kind of know that you're going to guys that used to be good players. Ridley still does draw a very significant 46.28% of the air yards. 18.2 yard average depth of target is one of the deeper options in the league, but he's only scored once. He's caught fewer than 2 balls per game on 5.4 targets per game. Hopkins pulling 2.8 catches per game out of his 4 targets per game. He scored once. He's pulling a 10.6 yard ADOT. That's significant enough downfield yardage, 21.4% of the air yards. As a guy who's not going to be popular again for a 29th rated points per dollar option at 5,000. It's not terrible. Really, all he needs to do is catch 3 passes, give you a handful of yards, and score a touchdown. That's not out of the realm of possibility. This stack doesn't rate out well 17th, but 9th by points per dollar, with everybody landing fairly cheap. But Tony Pollard is a part of that rating and easily the best piece in this game. I don't really think that much of a Conquo at the tight end position. So, yeah, as a value dart, either one of these guys is perfectly fine given the downfield big play nature. Just temper expectations. Don't really think that they're going to do that much. Be happy with your one catch for, your 12 DraftKings points or whatever. That is a fair point, as WW Fresh points out. Anyone is an upgrade over Levis. So, yeah, that is kind of true. Levis has thrown 25 attempts per game. He's completed 66% of them, but just thrown for 139.8 yards, 5 touchdowns against 7 interceptions. He's been bad. So, yeah, I guess I will give you a minor upgrade for Rudolph, but minor. Yeah, since we're on this game, I'm just going to wrap it, since it's a fairly low-end option anyway. Excuse me. Again, Pollard is the most appealing thing, but he's no secret. He's facing a defense that's allowed 5.3 yards per rush attempt to rank 32nd out of 32 teams, which last I checked is not very good. Overall, the Buffalo defense has allowed 1.5 rushing touchdowns per game. Nope, that's their offense. We weren't scrolled over far enough. There it is. 0.7 rushing touchdowns a game. I was like, 1.5. How does that rank 4th? But that was the offensive number. Their 0.7 ranks 9th. I knew it was a top 10 score. That's what I was looking for. So despite the fact that they're very, very leaky in a yards per attempt sense, they're a little bit better, a little bit sharper in a touchdowns allowed sense. They've given up 2.3 scores per game overall. That ranks 13th, kind of mid-board, 21 points a game. So not a ton of ability to, stop rushing plays, but they've been good against the pass, and they've been pretty good at limiting scoring. 16 sacks on the season, 6 interceptions. Those rank 16th and 10th in terms of the sack and interception rate. 2.88% interception rate. Again, going up against a quarterback, whether it's Levis or Rudolph, there is a little bit of scoring potential for the Buffalo defense here. But it's a gettable enough defense on the ground that I think it does justify the faith in Tony Pollard. No Tajay Spears. We talked about Julius Chestnut briefly. He has seen very, very limited volume in his brief NFL career so far. He's extremely cheap. I would expect 7 or 8 carries, or 7 or 8 touches overall. Still needs to break one. He's not going to soak up volume and take it away from Pollard. Pollard on the season gaining a solid 4.3 yards per rush attempt on just under 16 carries a game, 67.8 yards per game, 2.1 before and 2.3 yards after per rush attempt, 3 rushing touchdowns on the season. He also picks up volume in the passing game. Nearly 4 targets a game, puts him right around 20 potential touches per game, and that's sharing some time with Spears. Taking Spears out, like I said, a couple of those little opportunities will go toward Chestnut. Maybe a couple of them get converted into pass plays, but a couple will go in Pollard's direction as well. So increasing from a 20 potential touch player to a little bit more than that, even if it only becomes 21.2, it's still a little bit more meat on the bone. For a $63,000, $7,100 running back, you could do a lot worse than Tony Pollard. He's been very good this year. Okonkwo, just 2.6 targets per game. Another player I forgot to change. It's meaningless. There's no reason to change Okonkwo here. Just a naming issue. I never did get around to building that naming table. It's just a pain in the ass because I have to change the formula in all these different columns to add the if error. But Okonkwo, last week, played 30 snaps with the offense. Same output the week before, 30 snaps with the offense, 10 on special teams. 1 catch for 5 yards in week 4, 3 catches for 6 yards in week 6. Targeted 3 times in each of those games, either 2 or 3 targets earlier in the season. Has not been over 16 yards. Scored a touchdown back in week 1. Limited opportunities on limited quality of passing. Tyler Boyd, just 3 catches for 19 yards. Peaked 3 catches as a season high. He's done that 3 different times. Maxed out at 33 yards on 4 targets in week 3 so far. Boyd has not scored. Capable veteran receiver who we've seen be more interesting than this. With limited quarterback play, he's a limited receiver. He's the next man up as far as targeting goes, but there's only so much to work with there. Nick Westbrook-Ikhine scored a incredibly frustrating touchdown last week if you were playing this offense at all. He's been targeted twice all season. They both came last week. That's despite playing every single game and running at least 3 routes in every game. He peaked at 11 routes run in week 3, went untargeted in that game, went untargeted in all the other games. Last week, they decided to target him twice on his 4 routes run, and he caught a 9-yard touchdown pass. Nobody else caught one, but he caught one. It turned into a nothing play, and this is kind of a good example of why those super low-end plays can still kind of fail. He was essentially unowned on that slate, and he cost probably about the same, $3,000 price, $4,500 price. He came away with a touchdown, which is great, but it was on a 9-yard catch. It was 1 catch. So you're not exactly piling points on top of the touchdown. So even a receiver who, 6 catches for some yardage, 5 catches for some yardage, can still exceed that score. And if that guy happens to get in the end zone, he becomes the better play, even with Westbrook-Ikhine at the dead min price and no ownership. So it's not always just about getting that touchdown. To some degree, it is how does your touchdown and the rest of your game stack up against some other, similarly ranked, similarly priced value plays who might see a little bit more volume, a little bit more opportunity, provide a little bit more quality. So it's a good example of why, even though one person out there out of 100,000 entries spiked that wide receiver spot, I don't know for sure, but I don't think Nick Westbrook was in the winning lineup on either side. Correct me if I'm wrong. On the Bills side, Josh Allen is a major option at the quarterback position basically any given week. He's run the ball in 3 times this season. He's thrown 10 touchdowns against 0 interceptions. This is another offense that's just kind of only had to take out so much to win football games. Little Uncle Milty style offense here. 26 pass attempts for Josh Allen. He's completed 63% of them, but just throwing for under 200 yards a game. But again, a pretty significant 10-0 touchdown to interception ratio. Allen picks up the opportunity to work with Amari Cooper. They were lacking a little bit with Stephon Diggs leaving town over the offseason. Cooper checks in. He was drawing 50% of the air yards in Cleveland, 12.1 yard ADOT. He had scored twice in that terrible passing attack. He picks up major upside now playing with Josh Allen. He was drawing 8.8 targets per game. Maybe that rounds out to around 7 with other capable receivers here. Dalton Kincaid's a good tight end who's picking up 5.2 targets a game. Khalil Shakir drawing 4.2 opportunities per game. And again, maybe Allen throws a few more passes now that Cooper's in the fold. It gets up to like 30 pass attempts per game with a little bit more to spread around. There's upside for each of these receivers. Keon Coleman and Khalil Shakir could get interesting at both DFS ownership with both DFS ownership slipping and with some attention on the football field itself kind of slipping with the need to cover Cooper, the need to cover the premium tight end option. Well, now we're getting thinner on who's able to cover Khalil Shakir and Keon Coleman. Coleman's operated on a 13.7 yard average depth of target for 21% of the air yards. On his limited 3.3 targets per game, he's caught 2 balls a game, scored twice already. He's not been insignificant so far. He's cheap. He's easy to play. Rates out basically the same as Shakir. Shakir's caught 4 of 4.2 targets a game. His hands are fantastic. Coming into the season, that's why I thought he was an interesting receiver. His catch rate on opportunities over the last 2 years or year was very good. He's only done average with the opportunities he was presented this season. Just a 5.2 yard ADOT, and he's delivered 11.9 yards per target. That's not insignificant, that gain on that kind of an average depth of target. But he doesn't get up and down the field, really. That's not the nature of his game. So he was miscast as like the number 1 guy. Filling this role, I think he becomes more interesting. I think his touchdown upside increases. 2 touchdowns on the season on his 8.4 yard ADOT, or 8.4 yard air yard share. Curtis Samuel slips further and further down the board. He's only seen 2.8 targets per game. He hasn't scored. He's put up less than 5.5 yards per target and lower than his average depth of target by nearly a yard, that's not a worthwhile receiver. Ray Davis was interesting as the lead running back last week. That was another one that we nailed out of this game. In addition to the Knox touchdown, Ray Davis, not that it was a secret, a lot of sites ended up going in that direction. But during the show last week, when that popped up, we were talking about why he would be the more interesting option versus Ty Johnson. And he went out and he proved it. Had a pretty decent game. Carried the ball 20 times for 97 yards and caught 3 passes for 55 yards on 3 targets in that week. He's banged up, though. He's dealing with a calf injury. He was limited in practices, and we should have James Cook back in the fold. Cook practiced fully on Thursday and Friday. When we last saw him in Week 5 against Houston, he carried the ball 20 times for 82 yards and a touchdown. Caught 2 passes for 17 yards on 3 targets. He's a moderate volume running back, about 15 potential touches per week, but he's got ability and he's involved enough in this hyper efficient offense. Again, Buffalo doesn't run a lot of plays, but they are a significant points per play offense. I believe they're the bottom in terms of pace, in terms of plays per game, but their scoring output, ranks second, 4.87 NFL points per play. That ranks second in football. So a hyper-efficient offense. They're scoring 3.3 touchdowns a game. That ranks fourth, despite running a league low for plays. So again, this is an Uncle Milted kind of team. They're only going to take out enough to impress you, enough to knock you down. They don't need to impress you to win these football games. There's probably one person out there that knows that reference. Although Bill Simmons popularized it, so maybe other people do know it. Knox, limited opportunities, limited red zone targeting this season with Kincaid taking a little bit of a bigger role, but will see the occasional red zone look. Did convert one the other day for a touchdown grab, but we're talking about very limited appeal on a main slate, more of a showdown slate kind of an option. Downboard Mac Hollins was a deep target for this offense, but another guy who's probably going to get his looks cut. It'll be interesting to see how that breaks down between Samuel, kind of an underneath option, and Mac Hollins, kind of a home run hitter down the field. Hollins has scored 2 touchdowns this season on a 14.6 yard ADOT, catching 1.2 of 3.2 opportunities per game. It's been limited output, but that home run threat is there. So putting him in alongside these guys, how does that actually break down? Where does that opportunity go? It might just be split one look apiece, but I could get behind the idea of Hollins maintaining. Maybe it's not 3.2, maybe it's just 2 or 1.8 kind of opportunities per game. But the actual ability to just catch that one deep touchdown pass is still going to be there. So as a dart throw, he's on the board, but it's a dart throw. He's ranked in the 70s and 80s for a reason. 2 points in the median projection. I'm going to flag Samuel. I think the volume comes down a little bit more than that DraftKings numbers reflecting. It's difficult to make the adjustments against the PPR. I got to come up with a better way to take a catch away from some of these guys. Biggest bonus potential. It's truthfully Pollard, but I'm going to give it to Amari Cooper on the idea that 4 or 5 catches and 100 yards as they get familiar with the new toy in this offense. Seems like a good option. 5,800, 6,100, by the way. Pretty good price for that receiver. For all the talent that he's got. His price is down for having played in that Cleveland offense. Wide receiver 25-28 on DraftKings, 31-28 on FanDuel. Decent upside. Tennessee is going to have to keep pace to push any kind of scoring potential for Buffalo, though. 8-point spread and a 40.5 point total kind of concerns me. Again, this could be a game where Buffalo goes out, scores 3 quick touchdowns, and just coasts the rest of the way. Bouncing back up the board for Philly and New York. That was a long answer for WW Fresh's question about DeAndre Hopkins. Yeah, OMG Lulz, you can definitely play any stack with no run back. I agree with that. I like to pick and choose my run back spots. I really do. I think like a game like that last one, if you get overloaded for some reason to Bills, you don't necessarily need a Titans player as a bring back. Tony Pollard would be a quality option, but it would be an anti-leverage option. Either of the name brand receivers, Hopkins and Ridley, would be stronger options probably for that role with big play upside, but they're limited, and that is a limited passing attack with a team that I believe is implied for under 20 points and scoring way under 20 points per game. So yeah, that doesn't necessarily mandate a bring back play. I like getting bringbacks from the high end, Minnesota-Detroit games, the Atlanta-Seattle game that we're about to talk about in a minute. Even this game gives you a little bit of bring back potential. Giants 3-point dogs at home with the division rival Eagles in town. 42-point game on the board. Lot of the upside going in Philly's direction. It's difficult to suppress the Philly offense in terms of the raw scoring projections because you've got A.J. Brown, you've got Jalen Hurts, you've got Saquon Barkley. To a degree, Devonta Smith pulls a big projection as well. So they aggregate to stack 3 by raw points, 15 though by points per dollar on DraftKings. Stack 1 by raw points on FanDuel, but stack 12 by points per dollar. So that's a pretty significant, the most significant on the board disparity between the point scoring and the actual points per dollar value that the stack provides among all the teams on this slate. So know that, but also know that Saquon Barkley is going up against the Giants defense that's allowed 5.2 yards per rush attempt to rank 31st. They rank 20th with 7.3 yards allowed per pass attempt. They've picked off just one pass with their terrible, terrible secondary this season. The only thing that the Giant defense does well, and they do it very, very well, is rush the quarterback. They've got a league-leading sack rate. They've got a league-leading sack total. They've got a very aggressive pass rush. But that doesn't really benefit them. They've limited opponents to 20.2 points per game. That's good. It's top 10, ranks 9th overall. 2 touchdowns a game, also ranks 9th. But 5.2 rush yards per attempt, 7.3 pass yards per attempt, just a 0.54% interception rate that ranks 31st. Against that aggressive 12.32% sack rate that sits first, against all that quarterback pressure, the other factors of that defense should be better than they are. The point scoring is good. I mean, the 20.2 point limitation is good. But a team like these Eagles, if you're going to allow them all that cushion for yardage, they're going to break big plays. Saquon is going to break a big scoring play against this defense. He ranks as RB2 by points, 6 and 5 by points per dollar. Looks tremendous. I completely discount any ideas or buzz about revenge and all of that. Saquon loved being a Giant. He wanted to be here forever. He's probably pissed off at the GM, and maybe that feeds his desire to carry the ball more. But you don't need him to desire to carry the ball more because he's already carrying the ball, touching the ball more than 21 times per game. He's already gaining 5.3 yards per rush attempt, 5.4 yards per target on a limited 2.3 yard ADOT. He scored 4 rushing touchdowns on the season. He scored 1 receiving touchdown on the season. Saquon Barkley, any way you cut it, for any reason, is a significant piece of this offense. He disappointed us last week, just 47 yards on 18 carries, picked up 2 catches on 2 targets, so he did get his 20 potential touches. That was against Cleveland, but the 47 yards and 54 yards from scrimmage were both season lows. He was over 100 yards from scrimmage on just 12 touches the week before that, 84 rush yards and 32 receiving yards. Had 147 rushing yards against New Orleans on just 17 carries, scored twice in the rushing attack that week, picked up 4 catches for 9 more yards. 95 yards on 22 carries in week 2. 21 yards added to that on 4 catches. Failed to score that week, but still was over 100 yards pretty significantly from scrimmage. 24 yards, 24 carries, 109 yards, 2 TDs with 23 yards and a touchdown in the passing game back in week 1 in his Eagles debut. So if you're doing the math at home, outside of week 6, when I hyped them up a little bit, just like I'm doing right now, Saquon's been over 100 yards from scrimmage in every single game in an Eagles uniform. He's averaging 96.4 rush yards on his 5.3 yards per attempt. He is a fantastic option, even for 82,900. Especially if other running backs get more popular, just makes me more enthusiastic about the Saquon play. Jalen Hurts, QB4 across sites by points, but slips by points per dollar, as do his receiving options. AJ, wide receiver 18, but 42 by points per dollar. Smith, wide receiver 20, but 32 by points per dollar. On FanDuel, they grade out slightly better, 11 and 24 by points, 30 and 35 by points per dollar. A little bit less of an impact, but it's a pretty dramatic impact with these guys coming in at those price points. So I think there's more impact to the A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith upside for price discussion, going back several games to that Jefferson and Amon-Ra, these guys will come in at lower ownership, but they actually have to do more against their price points given what they typically do, and there's a bit of a spread here. Brown's drawing 9.5 targets a game. He's put up, this is who I was thinking of. Remember when I said there was somebody out there who had the good bookend games? Week 1, 5 catches on 10 targets, 119 yards and a touchdown. Missed weeks 2 through 4, and then had a bye week. Came back after the bye week, caught 6 balls for 116 yards and a touchdown on 9 targets. So those are almost identical games on opposite sides of that missed time. A.J. Brown's a tremendous receiver. He came right back into the fold and didn't miss a beat. Devonta Smith had a receiving touchdown in that game as well. 3 catches for 64 yards and a touchdown last week on just 4 targets. He missed week 4. They had the week 5 bye. Prior to those 2 weeks off, he had 7 catches exactly on 8 targets in week 1 and then 10 targets in each of weeks 2 and 3. Significant receiver with a pretty solid receiving average. Smith has 2 touchdowns on the season, so does AJ, but obviously in fewer games. Smith has picked up 8 targets a game, with AJ missing for part of that. 10.5-yard ADOT versus the 14-yard ADOT that Brown's pulling. Brown's the bigger home run threat. He's the bigger overall target for this team. He's the star, but Devonta Smith is a very solid, number 2 or 1A to AJ Brown's 1. They're going to be without Dallas Goedert, the starting tight end, but Grant Calcaterra can fill that role a little bit. Calcaterra's been targeted just 1.8 times per game on a 9.3-yard ADOT, so he can get up and get down the field a little bit at the tight end position. Caught 4 of 4 last week for 67 yards, including a big play. Didn't get in the end zone yet this season, but the opportunity is there. Hasn't been targeted in the red zone, but might pick it up as the starter at the position this week. John Dotson has been a complete waste of time. 2.4 targets a game on a 7.8-yard ADOT. Somehow he's turned that into just 2.9 yards per target. That's difficult to do. If I'm throwing you the ball over there, you shouldn't be only delivering yardage that reflects a pass to here. Hasn't scored this season, just 8.5% of the air yards on his limited targeting. He's carried the ball a couple of times ineffectively. Well, no, actually it was an effective carry. That's got to be one 13-yard rush. Yep, one 13-yard rush. That came last week. He also had 1 catch for 10 yards. He's peaked at, technically that game, if we're talking about scrimmage yards, 2 catches in each of weeks 3 and 4 for 8 and 11 yards and has failed to score. Not at all an interesting player. Kenny Gainwell just sees limited backup touches in the rushing game. He's an effective runner, 5 yards per rush attempt, but just 1.6 attempts per game, 1.2 targets per game. The volume is non-existent. Paris Campbell could be more involved maybe if Dotson continues to struggle. So far this season, Campbell's got a receiving touchdown, but it came in week 4 on just 4 catches on 4 targets for 17 yards. He caught 2 balls in week 3 for 13 yards, but the involvement has been very, very thin. Johnny Wilson has also drawn just limited involvement, but does have a 13-yard ADOT. He caught just 1 ball so far this season. He's been targeted 6 times. Was untargeted on just 2 routes in week 6. So again, limited opportunities down the board here. You're really just dealing with a pretty significant concentration across those 4 players with a little bit of potential for Calcaterra to get in the mix. I like the idea of a Hurts +2 that involves one of the premium receivers and Saquon, but I think with Calcaterra there as a mixer, you go Hurts plus one of the receivers and Calcaterra. You could go Hurts and Saquon and Calcaterra, which would probably be the lowest owned way to do it. And then, obviously Hurts, Brown, and Smith together, or Hurts and either of the receivers and Saquon together. Premium upside. Hurts can get up and away from the Giants' pass rush if he needs to. He hasn't been the most effective passer, but he is completing 68% of his 31.4 passes per game. He's thrown 6 touchdowns and 4 interceptions, 7.9 intended air yards per attempt, and that's partially working without one of his prime weapons. He's also run the ball in twice this season. He's running the ball 11.2 yards times per game for 3.5 yards per attempt. And obviously they've got the big pick him up and throw him into the end zone play that can feed his touchdown scoring. On the Giants side, it is exclusively the Malik Neighbors show. Honestly, don't fall into the Tyrone Tracy trap as long as Devin Singletary's back, and don't fall into the Devin Singletary trap pretty much at all. Singletary's not a good running back. He's carried the ball 14 times a game. He's gained 3.9 yards per rush attempt. I was saying this before he came to the Giants, or right after the signing, I guess. Hard Knocks aired after the signing, so I was saying it during Hard Knocks, that's a bad signing. And they were talking about it behind the scenes, the Giants. Oh, well, Saquon might leave, but we'll go out and we'll get Devin Singletary. He's our guy. We know him from when he played in Buffalo. Yeah, he wasn't good then, and he's not good now. 2 rushing touchdowns on the season, 1.4 yards before contact, 2.5 yards after contact. Paper-thin involvement in the passing game, 2.2 targets a game, delivering 6.5 yards per target on a negative 3.9 yard ADOT, because Daniel Jones turns around and throws the ball backward. No receiving touchdowns on the season. Tracy picked up 2.3 targets in his limited involvement. Has carried the ball 7.8 times per game for 4.4 yards per rushing attempt, and had a good game in Singletary's absence. In the matchup against Seattle 2 weeks ago, Tracy carried the ball 18 times. He gained 129 yards. Pretty significant output. Last week against Cincinnati, 17 carries for 50 yards. Different kind of game. He did score on the ground. He also caught 6 of 6 for 57 yards. I think his ultimate fate ends up being like a third down back, good pass receiving running back kind of a guy with a little bit of explosive ability. I don't know that he's necessarily a running back. He was a converted wide receiver in college. He spent very little time at the actual running back position just in his football career, let alone in the NFL. But he was effective in that Seattle game. He was okay in the second performance. I think it comes back with Singletary coming back and sacrificing, call it 3 or 4 of his opportunities. Figured 10 carries in the rushing attack for both guys, or maybe it's 10 to 12, favoring Singletary slightly. But that just kind of limits both guys. Daniel Jones, not a good quarterback. 36.5 pass attempts per game. He's completed 62% of them for under 225 yards a game. 6.1 yards per pass attempt is pretty limited, especially with the weapons at his disposal. 6.9 intended air yards, but 3.4 actual air yards per attempt. He's thrown 6 touchdowns against 4 interceptions. He's yet to run one in. Remember I said earlier that the yardage has been kind of limited. The rushing output has been kind of limited for a player who, in his successful DFS days, Daniel Jones got a lot of that from running the ball. He's gained 3.6 yards per rush attempt on 7.5 carries a game. He hasn't been in the end zone, 27 yards per game. It's not a significant runner right now. It is limiting to his passing upside. The delimiting factor, the unlimiting factor, the thing that unwinds it potentially, is the return of Malik Neighbors. They developed a pretty instant connection. There's no taking it away. Week 1, 5 catches for 66 yards on 7 targets, and then he immediately shot through the roof. Came back in week 2, 18 targets in his second ever NFL game. Caught 10 passes for 127 yards and a touchdown. Caught 8 of 12 in week 3 for 78 and 2 touchdowns. Caught 12 of 15 over 58 snaps for 115 yards against Dallas, but didn't score in that game. Then missed the last 2 weeks. Breath of fresh air coming back into the field, into the fold here for the Giants. I like his upside to go back to 10, 12 targets at least. Definitely scoring potential, 100-yard potential, touchdown potential. It's just what else does the Giants stack give you? Neighbors on his own, good play, good option, even at price, no issues with it. Giants stack? I don't think so. Maybe a few thin Danny Jones +1 with Neighbors, but that's what everybody who does that is going to do. Jones does give you a 7th ranked points per dollar rating at 5,400 on DraftKings. He's a different kind of option at 17th and 12th on FanDuel for 7,000. He's cheap at the quarterback position on that site, but there are better points per dollar options. On DK, this is more playable. I still won't call it overly appealing because I have no faith in the quarterback, but it's playable. Theo Johnson jumps into that mix as a playable 9th ranked points per dollar tight end. He only costs 2,800, but be very wary of that. He's only picked up 2.7 targets per game. The involvement has been very spotty despite playing 50+ snaps most weeks. He's played 80-something% of the snap share through the entire season. He's run 25+ routes in all but one of his games. He ran 15 in that one. Drew 1 target once, drew 0 targets once. Basically like a 3 to 5 target average. Peaked at 5 catches for 48 yards back in week 5 in that Seattle game. And now with Neighbors coming back, probably loses a few of those opportunities. Wandale's going to be limited a little bit more so in his opportunities. He did catch 11 of 14 targets in week 4 against Dallas, though. That was with Neighbors there. 71 yards, no score. Came off that one, caught 6 of 9 passes for 36 yards and a touchdown in week 5. Caught 5 of 11 opportunities in week 6, but only gained 50 yards and failed to score. Darius Slayton was more interesting in the 2 games that Neighbors didn't play. Slayton's dealing with a groin injury. He was limited in practice through the week. I would expect a downturn for him. Neighbors is going to step back into that role and take all the targeting away. So Slayton becomes a third man in behind Robinson in this configuration. I expect more of the opportunities to go to Robinson, but you might see Slayton for a scoring chance or two. He caught 8 of 11 targets for 122 in week 5, scored a touchdown, then came back 6 catches for 57 yards against Cincinnati on matching 11 targets. Prior to those games, he was targeted a maximum of 5 times, came away with 3 catches, 56 yards in that one. Minimal involvement, but a little bit of skill is the third option in the wide receiver position, but you can see rates out just in the 40s and 50s. Even Wandale, just at the fringes of playability in the 30s and 40s. Eric Gray, Danny Bellinger, Chris Manhertz, all basically do not play type options. And then Jalen Hyatt finally caught a pass. He's run 90-something sprints for this team so far this season. He had been targeted 3 times leading up to last week. Last week he ran 41 routes, season high. Was targeted 4 times. Caught 1 ball for 6 yards. Daniel Jones is not good at finding Jalen Hyatt down the field. Jalen Hyatt's only ability is speed. If he's running in a straight line that way, but Danny Jones can't throw the ball to him, that has no value for DFS. Neighbors on his own, yes. Neighbors stacked in thin stacks with Daniel Jones for value primarily on DraftKings, okay. You can sell me. After that, don't go piling a lot of Giants into your offense, even though this is a bad Philly defense that's allowed 4.8 yards per rush attempt to rank 25th, 7.3 yards per pass attempt to sit 22nd. They have a 17% pressure rate with 11 sacks and 2 interceptions. I like their upside to get a 3rd interception, if not a 4th one in this game against Danny Dimes. I like their opportunity to sack him a couple of times. This is all things Philly and very few things Giants, but there is playability in this game. Interesting options on this side of the ball especially. Saquon, if he's under-owned, is really appealing again. I'm going to keep banging that drum this year. Saquon Barkley, easily the top bonus option, but you get another bite at that apple with AJ. Both those guys could get there against this Giants team. I wouldn't be surprised by that at all. It's easily Malik Neighbors on the Giants side. All 3 of those guys could honestly hit bonuses. Wouldn't surprise if all 3 of those guys crack that bonus mark. Last game up is a good one. If you stuck with throughout, we'll be out of here well ahead of the 8:08 start for the ALCS. If you haven't done so already, there's a little thumbs uppy guy down there. Just click that one time. Trigger it to be a yes. A Roto Scouts show yes is all the algorithm at YouTube needs to know. If you subscribe, so much the better. We're still trying to get to 1,000 subscribers by the holidays. We haven't really pushed that button lately, but tell your friends. It doesn't cost them much to pull up YouTube and just subscribe to my channel. It does me a little bit of a favor. We can actually, excuse me, gets piggish around here late in shows. We can actually monetize things on YouTube, start gaining a little bit of revenue once we hit 1,000 subscribers. So tell your mom, tell your dad, go subscribe to the channel and block notifications and then never think about it again. I don't care if people actually, I care, but I want the subscriber count. 1,000 subscribers by, let's say, the new year. Let's get there. Seattle and Atlanta. Geno Smith stacking up his QB8 by points, but QB1 by points per dollar value on DraftKings. Geno's a significant passer. QB4 on the FanDuel slate definitely still has appeal over there. I love the weapons. It's a 3-headed passing attack with 3 excellent receivers, pretty capable tight end, fantastic running back, although Kenny Walker, as we found out mid-show, got downgraded to questionable and may not go. That would feed the upside for Zach Charbonnet to get involved again. It would feed, Kenny McIntosh at the bottom of the board, maybe a couple few opportunities, but primarily it would be focused around Charbonnet. But really, I think the upside would just get fed into the passing game. Walker missed weeks 2 and 3 Charbonnet carried the ball 14 times for 38 yards and a touchdown in week 2. He also caught 5 of 5 targets for 31 more yards. In week 3, he ran the ball 18 times, gained 91 yards, and scored twice. Also caught 3 passes for 16 more yards. In those same weeks, Geno went from 25 pass attempts in week 1 to 44 pass attempts in week 2, 34 in week 3. But then that's just kind of the nature of this passing attack. They've continued and actually enhanced that volume in the following 3 weeks. 56 pass attempts against Detroit was the season high. Followed that with 40 against the Giants and 52 against the Niners. They have to throw the ball to stay in games. He's thrown exactly 1 passing touchdown in every game. Just 1. Like I said earlier, like I said to Dennis in chat, I do not think that Geno Smith continues to throw for 300 yards, but only 1 passing touchdown in every game the rest of the way. I love the upside for this offense against a gettable Atlanta defense. There is scoring potential here. But Geno's going to have to actually go out and get it. He threw for 395 yards on the 56 attempts, completed 38 of 56, 67.9%, 395 yards, but just 1 touchdown, 1 interception in that game. He's been over 300 yards 3 times already, and he's been in the 280s in 2 out of the 3 other games. So again, Geno is a highly accurate, significant passer. He's averaging 296.3 yards per game. 69% of his league-leading 41.8 attempts per game. There is no way I can be convinced that this quarterback continues to only throw 1 touchdown pass a game. The 4-touchdown game is coming. Geno is an interesting piece. He's got great weapons. DK, 12.5 yard average depth of target for 41% of the air yards on his 9 targets a game. He scored twice to lead this group. JSN has a receiving touchdown. Tyler Lockett has a receiving touchdown. They pull 23% of the air yards on 8.2 and 6.7 targets per game. They operate a little bit differently. Jackson Smith and Jigba, 7.5 yard ADOT, 9.7 yard ADOT going toward Lockett. A little bit more downfield action for Lockett, but Smith and Jigba has not been as limited by his ADOT as it was last year. He's gotten downfield a little bit more this season, and he's been very, very involved in this passing game. And one of these guys could score more than 1 touchdown this week. Each of these guys could score a touchdown this week. The most likely guy to score more than 1 is DK. But it's not off the board for either one of these guys to pick up multi-touchdown upside. And they're all involved significantly for volume. Charbonnet is not an untargeted running back. And if he's starting in the lead back, he'll see more than 3.8 targets. He's got a receiving touchdown on the board this season. So does A.J. Barner. Backup tight end hiding all the way down here. Just 1.2 targets and very, very limited action going in his direction. Him and Pharaoh Brown just splitting backup tight end snaps. Most of the tight end share goes toward Noah Fant. He's actually drawing 4 targets a game. He's picked up a 5.6 yard ADOT for under 10% of the air yards, but he's returned to 8.3 yards per target, basically doubling up his target volume and adding to his average depth. Hasn't gotten in the end zone yet this season, but is capable of doing so. Picked up a few red zone targets. No, I'm sorry. Just 1 red zone target goes back to week 1. Has not been targeted in the red zone recently, but caught 6 of 6 targets for 63 yards in week 6 against San Fran, which is not nothing. If Walker does play, he's a significant piece. Carrying the ball just under 13 times a game for 4.5 yards per rush attempt. He scored 5 times in the running game. He's targeted 6 times per game as well in the passing attack. So there's a ton between the 2 running backs. We're talking about basically 10 targets. I wouldn't say that all of that goes in Charbonnet's direction if he becomes the bell cow back for a week. But you could probably expect an uptick from his just under 4 to around 6. Pretty significant. There are a ton of ways to stack this team too. Geno +1s work. They're going up against a defense that's allowed just 6.3 pass yards per attempt, but they've gained just a 14% pressure rate. If you're going to give Geno the time to just stand tall in the pocket, wait for his routes to develop, wait for these excellent receivers to get open, I will take the Geno Smith side of the equation against a 14% pressure rate and 5 sacks on the season every single time you offer that to me. So I don't really care that they're only allowing 6.3 yards per pass attempt. They've given up 1.3 receiving touchdowns a game. 2 touchdowns overall, ranks 9th. They've been a stout defense against the run. 4.4 yards and zero point 0.7 rushing touchdowns allowed per game by Atlanta. So maybe that impacts Charbonnet a little bit. But he does pick up that receiving upside. I do think he's a dynamic enough player given the opportunity to be the lead back. But nothing about this defense intimidates the Geno Smith play, I think, at all. I really don't. On the other side, Kirk Cousins, he's going to be facing a significant pass rush, if nothing else. 32% pass pressure rate for Seattle so far this year. 8.54% sack rate. It totals out to 17 sacks, 12 more than their opponents. That ranks 7th. Their 1.10% interception rate is just 27th. They haven't been good in the secondary, and they've allowed a ton of rush yards. Rush yards per attempt ranks 28th overall. They're also giving up 25 points per game. That's 24th in football. There's a reason that this game has a 51.5 point total. This is all the makings of a very good shootout type game, a very good DFS scoring game. We just kind of need Geno to do his part as far as those passing touchdowns. I think everything else falls into place if that happens. Cousins has had a couple monster games already this season. 225 yards with a touchdown last week. That was coming off of a 509-yard performance with 4 touchdown passes in Week 5 against Tampa Bay. 42 of 58 in that one. Had 2 touchdown passes back in Week 2 against Philly, 241 yards in that game. Has been under 250 yards in each of the games that were not the 500-yard game, but has major scoring upside and potential in any given slate. And a matchup like this, I love the upside for him. Very good weapons in a receiver like Drake London, who ranks 5th by points and 1st by points per dollar. London and Robinson at their respective positions on DraftKings, top-ranked players, points per dollar on DraftKings. 3rd ranked, 5th ranked by raw point scoring. On FanDuel, that's a little bit lessened. Robinson's the 6th ranked running back by points per dollar, and London's the 3rd ranked receiver by points per dollar. But this is a stack that sits 2nd overall for value, 7th by points, and 8th by raw points on FanDuel. Robinson this year, 13.7 carries per game, gaining 4.6 yards per rush attempt, 3 touchdowns on the ground. He's also picked up nearly 4 targets per game. So we're talking about roughly 18 potential touches. It's just under my ideal threshold, but that's significant enough. Hasn't scored in the passing game, but putting up 7 yards per target makes him a significant enough threat. 9 targets per game going in London's direction. He scored 4 times already this season. Solid 9.8 yard ADOT for 35% of the air yards. But Darnell Mooney not getting outdone in the passing game. 11.3 yard ADOT on 7.5 targets per game for him. Feeds a 33.9% of the air yards in his direction. And he's got 3 receiving touchdowns to London's 4. Mooney has exceeded my expectations this season. I didn't think that much of him. And he's put up a couple decent games. 105 yards and 2 touchdowns on 9 catches in Week 5 in that big Tampa Bay game. 3 catches for 88 and a score in Week 2 against Philly. Limited output last week, just 3 of 5 for 38 yards. But clearly the ability to bounce up to a big score in any given slate. Ray McLeod has drawn some significant targeting. He has not seen fewer than 3 targets in any given game this week. A lot more involvement in this offense. He peaked at 6 catches. He did that twice, weeks 4 and 5. He had 66 yards in week 5 against Tampa Bay. Has failed to score so far this season, but has also handled a few rushing attempts. He's a very dynamic player. We've talked about him a few times already this season. Just that high game-breaking skill set that you see in former kick returners. A lot of ability for Ray. So I would never scratch him out if I'm stacking up Falcons significantly, which I think it would pay to do this week. 5.8 targets per game overall. Just a 7.6 yard ADOT. Another player they look to put the ball in his hands and break one, make something happen. And he hasn't quite gotten there. But he's been effective, and he's playing 83% of the snaps last week, 89% overall. Kadarrell Hodge plays a more limited 9% of the snaps overall, but he's got a touchdown on the season. They've only looked his way 0.3 times per game. He saw a little bit of an uptick in output, an opportunity in the last 2 weeks. He ran 13 snaps with the offense in Week 5, caught 2 balls for 67 yards and a score. That was on 2 targets. 8 plays with the offense last week, ran 3 routes, went untargeted, and was untargeted before those games. He saw the little bonus opportunity after recovering a fumble on special teams 3 weeks ago in the end zone. Limited downfield threat. But the idea that maybe he gets up and gets out for one big play, puts him on the board at an extremely cheap 3,4,500 price tag. But again, we're talking about a guy who drops in at 70.67 and 78.78 across rankings. Tyler Algier, the forgotten man, by me just now. Not necessarily by gamers and certainly not by the Falcons. Algier's seen regular opportunities to poach scoring in this offense. He's a very productive running back when he gets the ball in his hands. Last week, he carried the ball 18 times, gained 105 yards, and scored a touchdown. Prior to that, he had peaked at 9 carries back in week 2, gained 53 yards in that one against Philly, had a 60-yard game on just 8 carries against New Orleans, and added 20 more yards to that on just 2 catches. He's a very good player, just limited volume overall. He doesn't have a zero impact as far as his regular volume, but to truly, truly stand out, to truly be like I need that guy in my lineup player, we probably need something to happen to Bijan. Overall, he's gained 5.5 yards per rush attempt on his 8.5 carries a game. He's got 1 rushing touchdown. Definitely an appealing player as a value option at 51 on DraftKings, 58 on FanDuel. He does get on the board. Since we're only getting 2, maybe 3 running backs in every lineup, the guys who rank out into the 20s become the borderline fringy kind of players, kind of like the 40s and low 50s do at the receiver position. So these are restrictive ratings, but he does have an explosive upside, a pretty fair median projection for the low salary, and the ability to score touchdowns in a game that should be fairly high scoring and should yield a few additional touches for him. I don't mind Tyler Algier as a dart throw of a value running back, and I kind of prefer him to like the Julius Chestnut type plays, but he comes in at a higher salary than those guys, so it's a little bit set apart by that because he's no secret. Outside of that, none of these guys really have appeal down the depth chart, but this is a very high-end game. Everybody from Ray up through Bijan is playable on the Atlanta side. Everybody from Geno and Kenny, if he's out there, down through Noah Fant at least is playable on the Seattle side. Jake Bobo provides a little bit of random upside. He's only gained 1.7 targets per game. He's caught 1.3 of them on a 7.8 yard ADOT. There's not much value there as a depth receiver, but he is a big-bodied guy and potentially could see a red zone opportunity. Just here and there kind of targeting. There's no actual volume here, and it's not really outside of just your large field slates. It's not really even worth doing all that often. He was targeted 4 times last week. He caught 2 passes for 18 yards. He peaked with 3 catches for 30 yards back in week 4 on 3 targets, and he's only seen 1 red zone opportunity this year. But again, he's a big dude who might get that opportunity to catch a pass for a touchdown every now and again. As a wild differentiator in Seattle stacks, if you're building 50 Seattle stacks this week, you can throw them into a couple. If you're only building 5 or 10 Seattle stacks, you're probably better off just sticking with the more obvious guys. I think that's everything we have to say about this one. What's going on in the chat? WW took out Jones and put in Geno. I agree. I think that's a better play as well. Yeah, week early on the Ertz play. I love the upside. I'm going to continue to like Zach Ertz's upside until his legs fall off at the tight end position. He's just a good tight end with good hands, and he should see some opportunities as we get toward the end zone. So, yeah, I like going back to that well. I love your thought on hoping that Saquon Barkley's lower owned than he ought to be. Love that upside. Dwindling attendance as we wrap up the show here. Coming up on 7:40 on your clock. 3.5 hours into the show. You guys absolutely rock for hanging out this long. Everybody watching or listening on the replay at 2.5, 3 times speed before lock. Love you guys too. Hope you hit the like button. Check out rotoscouts.com. Under $1 a day for every single plan, for every single sport, all in pricing. No hidden fees. No surprise, this is a new sport. We're going to just start projecting WNBA, so you need to pay us more. No. If I decide to start doing it, you're going to have access to it. If I suddenly become a NASCAR fan this February and decide to start projecting NASCAR, you're going to have access to it. I randomly was bored a week ago and decided to create NHL projections, or a new NHL projection model, I should say. That's been up on the site for every slate this year. Full access, one price, one plan, weekly, monthly, quarterly. They're all under $1 a day. Check them out at rotoscouts.com. Check out acemine.io. Oh, I forgot. Don't leave if you haven't left yet. I forgot. I promised AceMine sim results, and I ran them. Let's show these real quick. So this is AceMine. These ran as non-constructed lineups, right? So these are just put together by the sim, and I ran it for the 27,000 entry. So this is not your extreme monster field setup here. This is for the smaller field Milly. You can see some interesting results around Sammy Darnold there for one thing on DraftKings. This is the DraftKings results. A lot of Darnold. I would ignore this top one. That's way too much weight with Akers in there, Jefferson and Addison going with Sammy Darnold. That's what you get when the sim puts the lineups together. But these other ones with some Addison, with a double Addison Jefferson there, not bad. I don't love the Elijah Moore factor in that. He's a differentiator for sure. Theo Johnson getting in here as a cheap tight end helps to pay for some of those things. But the Darnold +2 configurations are interesting to see up toward the top of the board. That looks like a Danny Dimes plus Malik Neighbors that did get there with Mixon and Bijan. Some playable options and a good value tight end there. Jordan Love I like a lot better than that Danny Dimes lineup. Jaden Reed, we talked about him being a top end receiver. This one also gets the Chuba Hubbard, Kyron Williams combo in the 2 running back spots. And then it has, I don't love the double tight end that we went with in that one, Pitts and Schultz. A lot of Giants defense popped up in those top 20 lineups. Again, this is not against our super large field. A lot of Giants defense popped up overall on DraftKings. Holy shit. Don't get too excited about that. I would temper my expectations for the Giants D. I expect some scoring to come out of Philly. That's probably just driven by, one, I might have just accidentally mashed the keypad and put an incorrect number in when I was inputting the defense numbers manually for DraftKings. That's a weird outlier. Everything else looks fine. Tony Pollard landing in 37% of your top 150 lineups on DraftKings. Bijan pulling a 39% rate. A Chalky Chuba Hubbard. 33% exposure. David Njoku, as expected, as a strong value option with our projections on the DK slate, 32%. The Addison Jefferson combo, both at 29% with Darnold right there with him. So that is a 3-man on DraftKings. This 3-man is coming up a lot. Across our top 150 lineups. Again, this is just one sim against the smaller field, but it's not nothing. That's a lot of shares for those 3 players as a group. London, Kyron, all the guys we talked about drawing some shares here. Kenny Walker will go away and be replaced by Charbonnet in a pretty significant way if he doesn't play. Jaden Reed and Christian Watson both hitting the board pretty hard. A-Rich getting on here 17% of the time. Some mixing coming through. One guy I'm looking for is Saquon. Where's my Saquon shares? Just 7% for Saquon on DraftKings. I don't know what ownership that went in against for the public exposure. I would have no problem taking Saquon up to 10, 12% against that number, though. I think there's untapped potential there. Algier got into this one at a cheap price. 3% of the top 150 for Tyler Algier. Again, remember, that's a value-based dart with some scoring potential. Bijan's in a whole hell of a lot more of them. But he got there. Algier got there a few times. Outside of the extreme upside for the Darnold plays, get a little bit of mixed opportunities across some Daniel Jones, Jordan Love stacks. Remember, the QB just basically drives the stacking. So just talking about the quarterback position should at least inform some of the skill player selections here. But some Love, some Goff, Joe Burrow, a lot of Goff. Here's a Geno that came through. Again, that's a Geno plus the running back and 2 receivers. I don't love that construction that the sim came up with. That's not a lineup I would naturally land on. But obviously it did come through our sim. A lot of Geno as we get down the board here. He was in 13% of the top 150. Love got into 15%. Darnold again 27%. CJ Stroud just 1%, kind of limited. Jaden Daniels is the top overall projected quarterback, just 4%. Probably bouncing off some popularity and some higher prices. Levis obviously not going to rank out well. There's an Andy Dalton outlier. Andy Dalton with Chuba, Bijan, Leggett, Deontay, that's another +3 that I don't love. So again, the correct way to do this is to build a pool of lineups outside of this and then drop it in so that they're bouncing off. And if you could build, 10,000 lineups to throw at a 27,000 entry pool, then you're doing really well. If you throw that against the 190,000 entry pool, you're getting an impact, but you're getting a lot of poorly built lineups. But that does create a good simulation of the public. But you want to be dropping high quality lineups and well constructed lineups into this to capture the truly correct approach. FanDuel Sim, again, ran against just the 10,000 entry slate. Kirk Cousins on the top of the board. Cousins, London, Pitts, with a Hubbard, Kenny Walker, Kyron Williams, just super chalky running back approach. I don't love the two-man Carolina coming out of that. I would probably change that out, but that's an effective enough lineup. Pretty broad spread, though, looking down the quarterback position. A lot of variance in names there. Just off the top here for FanDuel. A lot of the expected names. No real surprises up in that list. But the variance is a little surprising. But Darnold looks great. Like the opportunity for him. That's a Jones and Addison lineup there. Different on FanDuel, though. In the top 150 lineups, just 6% Addison. And I'm not seeing any Jefferson. Here's a Jefferson. 11% Jefferson. So doubling Addison's exposure. But that's a third of the exposure that they had on DraftKings. Darnold at 11%. That's an interesting wrinkle site to site. Drake London is drawing a bigger share. 35% going in London's direction. Cousins at 25%. So it looks like the Falcons are outpacing the Vikings as far as FanDuel upside goes across our top 150 in just, again, this clunky version of the sim. All the chalky running backs are going to come up. Chuba was at 41% in the top 150. Kenny Walker at 37%. Kyron Williams at 39%. So, Dennis, if you're still here, and even if you're not, I'm sure you'll see this when you use these tools yourself. For FanDuel, I do think it just kind of works to just go to these chalky high-end running backs. That's what Dennis and I were talking about a little bit earlier. But just makes sense. They're coming up a ton in the Sims. Only 3% for Saquon. That's, again, another piece that I might grab and try and differentiate with, especially with Kenny Walker coming off the board. That could push some additional upside in Saquon's direction, but he is a rough points per dollar proposition. There's Pollard. 15% going in Pollard's direction. 43% going toward Aaron Jones. Holy shit. So Jones, by far the most significant piece of the Vikings coming up on the FanDuel slate. That's kind of a wrinkle. So that's telling us in sim results is you can play some Sammy Darnold with Justin Jefferson and even some Jordan Addison, but your best approach to the Vikings, maybe to go uncorrelated Aaron Jones. There's one. There's one. There's one. There's one. Obviously, this is a little bit, anecdotal, but it does come from one full sim here. Kind of interesting. With that in mind, you guys, you can find these results yourselves by plugging in our projections over at acemind.io. They also provide projections. They've got some ownership numbers up on their site. Great tool across different sports. Going to be key for NBA. We're going to be talking about it every single day when we start up NBA season in a few days. That's coming on Tuesday. Prepare. But I think that'll wrap up the show for tonight. I got an ALCS game starting up in a little bit, and I got to find some dinner before that starts. You guys are the best. Absolutely love every single one of you out there. A little bit more so for the guys who have signed up for subscriptions already. That absolutely is killer. Love the volume that we're seeing in that department so far, but let's keep on pressing that button. Appreciate every single time it happens, though. I'm seeing them individually. So literally, as you guys sign up, I am watching that, and I see your name, and I think good things about you, and I wish you luck in my head in whatever slates or endeavors you might be taking on. Good luck out there this week. Somebody go win $1 million, huh? I'll see you Monday, Tuesday at the outside. Good luck, gang.